Is everybody ready? Okay, we'll begin our meeting at 2 minutes after 4. This is a special board workshop of the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors. And would the Secretary please take the roll?
Directors Gunther.
Here.
Akbari.
Here.
Huang. Here. Reed.
Here.
And Sethy.
Here. Patrick, would you like to lead us in that?
Thank you. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So at this time, we're welcome to take public comments on matters on the notice of this special meeting. Is there anybody here that would like to speak? Are you a member of the public?
No,
Okay, so we'll close public comments. If somebody arrives late, maybe we can give them the courtesy. So we'll move on to the action calendar, item 4.1.
Item 4.1 involves the authorization to enter into an agreement for consulting services to develop and prepare emergency operating procedures. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver. The district's 2016 Hazard Mitigation Plan, or HMP, includes actions the district should take to mitigate the effects on the normal operation of the district from disasters such as earthquakes, wildfire, and severe weather. One high implementation priority item identified in the HMP was the updating of the district's Business Continuity Plan, or BCP. The district has a critical need to have emergency operating procedures, or EOPs, in place and available following a disaster for use by personnel that may not be familiar with the operation of the district's water production and distribution facilities. Because the EOPs will be a part of the BCP and will be critical to the district's emergency response following a disaster, staff obtained a proposal from EMA Incorporated for consulting services to develop and prepare the needed EOPs in the amount of $103,500. There are adequate funds in the budget for this expenditure. Board authorization to enter into an agreement for consulting services with EMA Incorporated for the preparation of the EOPs will help the district meet its strategic goal number 1.3, improve emergency preparedness and response capabilities. Staff's recommendation is by motion, waive procurement policy number 1, requiring requests for proposal for professional services above $50,000, and 2, authorize the general manager to enter into an agreement with EMA Incorporated for consulting services to develop and prepare emergency operating procedures in an amount of $113,850, which includes a 10% contingency of $10,350. Mike Wickman is here tonight to answer any specific question on EMA's scope of work.
Any questions from the board or comments?
Now, one of my concerns has been the inability of the district to develop a simple concept of operations of how we would do a response to a disaster. And it need only be a statement of policy, approach, and then an outline of the things that need to be done. Is there any possibility that something of that nature could be at least attempted as part of the preamble to this effort?
I don't want to say yes or no to that question because I understand the concept that you're trying to achieve. However, I want to keep the scope of this very specific to the execution of emergency operating procedures for staff that may not be familiar with the district's water production and distribution facilities. There might be another vehicle that would better address your concern.
I'm supportive of efforts going into various steps, and this is one of the modest incremental steps toward developing a contingency operations plan, and so we supported the item.
Okay, thank you.
No comments? Go for it. Would somebody like to put forward a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Huang, aye. Reed,
All right.
and Sethy.
Aye. So we'll move on to one of the main topics of the meeting, update on the advanced metering infrastructure at the AMI project.
And our manager of engineering and technology services, Stevenson, will kick us off on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Shaver, and I am happy to bring this item to the board tonight. It's an important project for the agency, as can be reflected by the sheer number of people at tonight's meeting to support it. Things have been moving quickly on the project, and we want to ensure that we come back to the board at certain milestones as the project progresses, and that was a commitment that we made to the board. And so tonight we wanted to share a few of those milestones and make sure that, that the board is on board with the direction that the project is going. So we've recently completed our assessment of business needs for the agency, and so we wanted to summarize and share those with the board tonight. Also, we're working on preliminary information that would be shared with the public, and so we want to make sure that the board has an opportunity to see that, preview, and provide any input. And then also we are preparing to begin the all-important alternatives analysis that we've been talking about for some time. We've had some good input from the individual directors to date, but we want to ensure that the directors, the board sees the direction that we're going and can provide input to staff tonight, staff and the project team. So there's no formal board action requested tonight, but we are looking for your input as to the direction that we're going. So with that, I'll introduce Ben Egger, who's our AMI project manager, and Ben will introduce other members of the project team and get the item going. So Ben.
Okay. I do have a tendency to sometimes not project well enough, so do let me know if I'm not. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson, for the introduction. Good afternoon, board, staff, and members of the public. My name is Ben Egger, as Stevenson introduced me. I am the project manager for the district's AMI project. And this afternoon we're giving an update on the AMI project. So I think Ed did a good job of providing some context there, but we listened to the feedback in the January board meeting. Certainly we understand there's a lot of enthusiasm. I certainly share that enthusiasm for this project. And we heard the request to bring regular updates to the board and provide the ability for input along the way. Tonight we have three key agenda items, and so I'd like to narrow our focus on those three items. Namely, the needs assessment presentation. The needs assessment is a task that is nearing finalization, nearing completion, so we'd like to present that. The preliminary public outreach plan is something that's in development, so it's at a different stage of progression, but certainly we have some good work done on the public outreach plan we'd like to share with the board. And then the alternatives analysis, which is a task that we're yet to start. It's a future task, but we wanted to give a preview of the work we're going to be doing there, and then I'll provide some closing. So the three key agenda items are slightly different in their progress. So the first one, needs assessment, will be more of a presentation of the outcomes of that needs assessment. Staff have done a lot of work, and we've put together across multi-agency, multi-departmental team, and they've very enthusiastically and conscientiously done a lot of work on the needs assessment. The public outreach plan is more of a progress update, and we'd like to have some discussion about the direction we're going there. And then the alternatives analysis, again, is a preview, so we just want to capture any input before we start into that project, that topic. I mentioned, I think, in the January board meeting that this is it's a big undertaking. An AMI project is quite a large undertaking. However, it has a lot of benefits and efficiencies across the agency. I think every department can leverage a lot of efficiencies and benefits out of the AMI deployment. So we've put together a team to reflect that in the project team. As you can see, every department is represented on the team, and some departments with multiple divisions. So there's a lot of different perspectives. We've brought together a lot of thought leaders throughout the district. So I'd like to introduce the key stuff from our AMI consulting team, EMA, who will be co-presenting tonight. From EMA we have Mark Gurmscheid, Joel Cardy, and Scott Mittner. So I'll let them introduce themselves, but they'll be back to talk more.
Sure. Here we go.
Go for it.
Okay. I'm Mark Gurmscheid. I'm the EMA project manager for this project, and we're working with ACWD conducting workshops to contribute to the assessment in this presentation. A couple of other members from EMA are here today. We have Lynn Powers.
Hello.
Lynn Powers is the vice president with EMA, and Lee Henderson. And Lee is a subject matter expert on business process. We also have our partner, Joel Cardy.
Hello, my name is Joel Cardy. I am the AMI subject matter expert. So my focus over the last 20 years has been just on AMI technology related to water meters, installation deployment strategies, that sort of thing. For the last 13 years, we've been working closely with EMA, and we've been consulting on just water-based AMI projects.
And I'm Scott Whitner with DNA Communications. We're based here in the Bay Area. So I'm the public outreach and sort of the local landscape component subject matter expert of the group, helping to develop the public outreach plan and hopefully address any concerns and questions and incorporate your feedback today into the plan that's currently underway. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. So we have built into each agenda item at the end of the agenda item, we have a Q&A for that agenda item. If we could compile all our questions and tackle those at the end of the agenda of each agenda item, that'd be great. Although I'll endeavor to check in as we go and just make sure that the pacing is correct, is right for you guys. So just to sum up, Joel and Mark are our AMI subject matter experts, and Scott is our public outreach subject matter expert. So as you were proposing questions, I'll direct them that way. Sorry, Scott. Sure. Okay, so as you know, we have a pretty comprehensive approach to our AMI project. It's a 3-phase over 5-year approach, which was recommended to us in the AMI, the ACWD AMI plan that you heard back in 2016. We're currently in phase 1. We're midway through phase 1, which is planning and preliminary design phase. Phase 2 will be our next progression, which will be a proof of concept, where we'll do a subset installation of the AMI system, evaluate its effectiveness, stress test it, and then roll those what we learned from that back into the project before we move into construction of the full deployment, which will be phase 3. And then a little more review, introduction, before we get into the meat of the presentation. Phase 1, scope of work. As you may remember from January, there's quite a few components. The ones in green, although we've done a lot of work on all of these tasks, the ones in green are the ones we're focused on tonight. Namely, from the design study, it's the needs assessment and alternatives analysis, and then from public outreach, it'll be our public outreach planning. Okay, so I just wanted to check in before we get started. We're ready to go. Okay, so the needs assessment. I'll start with our primary project goals, which presented in January. So revenue continuity. Certainly a goal of the project is to ensure revenue continuity and protection into the future. Maximize customer engagement. Prepare the district for absorption of the AMI technology and to leverage its efficiency. And then operational enhancements, certainly to capitalize on the feasible operational enhancements, as I think our needs assessment will really identify a lot of those. And then schedule and value to deliver what is a pretty fast-paced project on time and meeting expectations of value. So what we did is map those project goals to the strategic plan to make sure there's alignment between the district's strategic plan and the AMI project. And so that's part 1 of this needs assessment. The next part will be the needs and identification of those needs that support the project goals. So we kind of have 2 mappings based off the project goals. My understanding is that the strategic plan is probably pretty fresh in everyone's mind, and the importance of AMI in achieving those strategic objectives is probably fairly fresh. So my plan is to accelerate through this mapping so that we can get into the needs assessment. I know we have quite a few tonight too. So revenue continuity. We certainly want to ensure reliability in our system, in our billing, and our metering as we progress through the implementation. Customer engagement. Customer engagement is a pretty primary goal of the key goal of the AMI deployment. And as you could see in the strategic plan, there were a lot of initiatives that look to enhance our public awareness and our customer outreach. District absorption, innovative and new management concepts, planning for the future, and engaging employees to drive productivity. I think there's good alignment between both the project goals and the strategic plan. And then operational enhancements. There are a lot of efficiencies and enhancements that AMI will afford, and we'll certainly that is identified in the strategic plan, and it is certainly a goal of the district's AMI project. And then schedule and value. I know that efficiency and cost reasonableness is a primary focus of the district, and so we'll be looking to maximize some of those efficiencies that the district can leverage and ensure that we deliver a valuable AMI tool. So on that note, I'll hand it over to Joel, who's going to walk through our business drivers.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben. So what this does is lay out the broad-based project goals. And what we wanted to do is start to take a look at technology, take a look at the needs of the district, and put a little more meat to what does customer service enhancement mean? What are you actually going to do with it? So what we did is we take a look at technology in terms of the financial benefits, but also the non-financial, because there's a bunch of stuff you can do with the data that can benefit other parts of the district. So it's not just a meter-to-cash improvement. We've grouped our benefits into 6 key areas: revenue protection, operational efficiency, improved distribution, enhanced customer service, which is always a big one, societal benefits, which relate mostly to conservation initiatives, and then smart city applications, which is, can you use the network and the software to do other things with it? So these sort of cross-functional areas align well with project goals. So revenue continuity and revenue protection are quite similar. Customer engagement obviously matches to enhanced customer service. District absorption is really about making sure that all parts of the organization use the technology, are trained, know how to do it, and there's improvements to those business processes. And then there's the smart city. So they align quite well with the project goals, and I'll get into a little bit of the meat on what we've identified as improvements. So when we identify the goals and the benefits, we're going to start talking about business drivers, so AMI business driver. And what an AMI business driver is basically an improvement to a business process or a new business process that you would undertake with the technology. But ultimately, we're trying to link it to a need of the organization. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. So we identify those business drivers, and then we start to align the AMI business drivers to the AMI specifications that we're going to have to ask for through a procurement process. We then align those specifications to a user acceptance test, as well as some of the concrete business process improvements. So what it looks like is, as we went through these business drivers, and each of those categories had like 8 or 9 different business drivers, we asked the project team to rank them in terms of your intention to, would you use it? So we've categorized them. The blue ones are considered essential, and what this means is it's a business driver, will have immediate benefits, and it's critical to the project. When we rank it as green, which is an important business driver, this is important business driver. The team saw some benefits to it, but there might be some cost-benefit analysis we have to do, or there could be some limitations on the vendors that are only one vendor is able to provide that function, then that might be something that doesn't get implemented. Then there's future, which are the business drivers that essentially may have a benefit but wouldn't be incorporated into the project today. And then there's business drivers that are not important at all. So it's really, this is aligned to the intention to implement these things, these improvements to the business process, or the intention to reap some of the financial benefits from it. So elimination of meter reading costs would be an example. So with each of the business drivers we reviewed, here's an example, which is a zero consumption. We have a description about how you use it in general terms, and then we have a description of how it applies to ACWD, and if it does. So in this case, this talks about zero consumption. Currently, the district does approximately 15,300 move-in, move-outs. So if we were able to apply a virtual shut-off, which means we're not actually shutting them off at all, we're just putting them into a monitored group, and you would get triggers if consumption occurs. So what it does is it starts to impact a few business processes that we've identified, operational maintenance, customer service, but we've identified a savings of about $340,000 a year. So this is the type of thing we did with all the business drivers. Now this is just one, not all of them have financial implications, and when they don't, we just state that. Lastly, we have spelled out how the technology applies to that business driver. So certain things, so this is a good example where move-ins, move-outs for an AMR mobile type technology, you would still have to send someone there. So it really doesn't meet the need of the district. In this case, AMI would definitely allow for that. So the cross-functional group of stakeholders that the project team that we've been working with identified, we reviewed 33 different business drivers across all those categories. And we also reviewed some previously identified benefits in a business case previous to us. So we identified 16 that were essential, 6 that were considered important, 6 that were considered nice to have, but probably we won't implement it during the project, and then 5 were considered not important. So the team did a good job of actually, determining, the likelihood of will we actually do this benefit. So the specifications, the future specifications, will support those 22 essential and important business drivers that have been identified. I'll give you some examples of those business drivers. So in revenue continuity, there was a couple areas where AMI technology can help in this area. The first is better information, better consumption information for setting rates. The second example I'll mention is detection of misapplied meters. So there are cases where a meter is either oversized or undersized, and if that is the case, then revenue could be getting lost or not being accounted for. I'm not going to go through all of them for the sake of time, but they are on the presentation. On customer service and customer engagement, this was a very big category of business drivers. The team definitely indicated the desire to improve customer service, give customers the ability to detect leaks, to get alerts through their phone so that they can better manage their consumption. And some of the benefits we saw were there were some high bill complaints, and those high bill complaints we could avoid by setting up alerts. So those alerts go out, get sent to the customer before a bill does. So they can actually have an opportunity to change that behavior. There was also vacation monitoring and a few others that we identified that would help improve customer service. District absorption, obviously there's improved meter reading safety. By applying an AMI technology, you're eliminating that manual meter reading process. And there was also some better ability to maintain the system. Cut wire alarms and that sort of thing. These were all identified as crucial to the maintenance, the meter maintenance group. Operational enhancements. So there's a dynamic water balance. Currently, there's a water balance done once a year. Being able to do that and do the calculation to understand water loss more often was definitely considered, a real benefit to the water resource group. Also, there's detection of backflow. So currently, you have about 2,000 backflow preventers that you guys test on an annual basis, with 10 to 15% of them failing each year. So the customer has to repair them. If you could get flags for those devices that may not be operating, you could enhance safety on the water system. There's also some operational enhancements were related to bylaw enforcement. So this was a less important one. I suspect if we were here 2 years ago with the drought, this would probably be more important. But so this is a good example of an important business driver that they may not do right away, but eventually they would, which is identifying people that may be violating water bans. So now I'm going to bring Mark in to talk risk.
So risk management. So we took a look at EMA's project experience, AMI project experience, Joel's project experience, as well as ACWD's project experience. and we conducted a risk management workshop. And so what we're looking for is, given all of our experience, to take a look at what projects, what events might impact project goals. So we put together a risk register so that we would track those items. Given our experience, we have a good idea of what kinds of risks may present themselves. We have a good idea of how to address those risks. In some cases there's acceptance, in some cases there's mitigation, in developing some sort of response to when those risks occur. So we develop our risk register, and we revisit that risk register to determine if we're discovering those risks and applying the appropriate response to those risks. So for each risk, we assessed an impact, given a dollar value, so that we know how important the risk is. We also took a look at how likely it was that risk was going to occur. And we actually measured those and gauged those and drew them on a chart here so we could see how important, how impactful, how likely it was that these risks were going to occur. So these risk workshops that we put together and went through these discussions were, fairly detailed. So this information went into the needs assessment. So some examples of project risk that we looked at. So first one was uncertainty of the current meter data. So current meter data is vendor, brand, size, kind of register, the date it was installed, things like that. So every utility has a certain amount of uncertainty about what the accuracy of their meter inventory is. So we proposed, and we're following a path to survey the current meter data. And so that's avoidance. We want to avoid uncertainty. The accuracy of what we know about the meter inventory affects our estimations of the overall project cost, and also in implementation, how the vendors, what their estimated cost is to implement the project. We also took a look at limiting our technology alternatives. So with respect to technology alternatives, there's mitigation. So technology alternatives, for example, give us coverage of the data collectors to cover and be able to communicate with a certain number of meters. Different meter manufacturers and different AMI manufacturers have different technologies that give different coverage areas. So with vendors that have really good coverage, that's good for the project. For vendors that have a technology solution that doesn't cover this area very well, then we have mitigation strategies. If that vendor actually looks really good to us for other reasons, there are other things that we can do to increase their coverage. For technology age and obsolescence, we address avoidance here. So if it's a new technology that hasn't really been proven yet, that's something that's important to us to try and avoid. If it's an existing technology that has a wide base, but it's perhaps not a go-forward strategy for that vendor, that's probably something we want to avoid as well. And then stakeholder communication. So stakeholders are really a large group of people, including yourselves. So if there are communications that are taking place that are less than what the audience needs, then we can mitigate that. We can change our communication strategy. We can augment or create our communication strategy to make sure that everyone is getting what they need from the communications.
Okay, so so you heard there the three main elements of our needs assessment: the mapping to the strategic plan, the mapping to the business drivers, and as well as really a value-added risk management tool that EMA provided to capture all those elements of the project that we may not be able to solve right now, or we can assign certain solutions to show that they're captured. Right. Are there any questions at this point?
You want to start us off?
I just want to remind everybody, it's important, there's machine hum and stuff back here, so just try to project, okay?
Right.
Both of you guys.
You want to start us off?
I'll start off. Please bear with me. I've got some real concerns. I didn't see a business case in your needs assessment. And I don't think you identified a need. It's my understanding this is about a $25 million project. Our loss of revenue water due to breaks is $2,500 a year. Beyond addressing that issue, I didn't see a true financial advantage. We have a bad experience with bleeding edge technology. We spent about $30 million on an ultrafiltration plant that is currently not in operation. We don't have a water shortage in this district. We have a water surplus, anywhere from 200 to 400% over capacity, depending on the time of year. So we're not trying to chase water efficiency. We have 15 years of drought, storage, and semi-tropic. It's just one of our backups. We're soon going to get an intertie with another pipeline, Los Vaqueros. We'll have even more. We don't have a water shortage. We don't have a problem with conservation, because regional media showed that we could get 23% conservation when we asked people not to turn off their water. You did not go into the type of meters that we currently have, which are standard displacement meters, which do not measure the bottom 4 to 8% of the flow. I believe we'll be out of compliance with AB 555, which asks us to keep tracking non-revenue water, and most of that will be on the customer side. And that would be one of the critical issues I think you're going to have to take a look at, and I would identify that as a need. Revenue continuity. We have a dysfunctional rate structure that overcharges our water by about 400 to 500% and undercharges the fixed cost. If we brought that into balance, a lot of the revenue continuity issue goes away. We don't have a problem with people not paying their bills. 0.2%. When we talk about backflow prevent, we already have a system in place that handles a number of our meters. So why do we need one that's universal? As backflow preventers, great idea. But that's 2,083,000 meters. And we have the capability of doing that today with our current infrastructure. The idea is just because you can do something doesn't mean you have to do it. It's a great line. And I don't think we're there. I mean, if I look at, when you talk about AMR, well, you can have being able to drive by and turn the meters off in a vehicle remotely without having to get out of the vehicle also generates cost savings. One person I spoke with, Andrew Walters, who was J.P. Morgan, managed numerous economics of these systems, never found an AMI system that costed out. He founded some that did for AMR. And that was national, hundreds of various systems. It's great technology, wonderful solution, but if our total losses are $2,500 a month, a year, a partial solution of $25 million. There may be some areas that we have potential. There's the need for 5G is coming around. If we can build a 5G system, which is going to be the longest pole in the tent, maybe that should be your first phase. Put in the towers. You know there's an economic value, inherent economic value to that. But when it comes to operations, we already have facilities in place that can monitor our larger meters in the distribution system and give us the distribution information we need, even in a contingency environment, to the level of operations capability we have today. Contingency operations haven't really started yet, and hopefully this current plan or contract we have will take us in the first step in that direction. So that's more of a rhetorical comment, but where is the need Where's the business case?
Director Weed, I'm wrong.
So I have to say, I do disagree with some of the facts that Director Huang shared. We obviously have very different opinions on this board. I do share a little bit of some concern with Director Weed in the sense that I think this is a little bit higher level than I'm looking for. You outlined a very good general approach. You showed some very nice tools, but if you recall from the January discussion, we like weeds. We really like to go down to the weeds. So I guess some of the assurance that question out, I love the risk management tools that you have the registry, then you track it and you put it in categories, in buckets. I like buckets, that's fine. But I guess, there are aspects like information security. When you're doing your business case, that kind of mentions that customer satisfaction, they cannot be translated into dollars. I think that is part of what I would disagree with Director Weed in the sense that you cannot look at the financial aspect to justify AMI, because our other boss is the customer service district, and they have definitely let us know very loudly that this is something that they want. So, there is that other aspect. I would ask you somehow quantify it a little bit, because we balance public opinion and dollars. We definitely will not go into a project when we know we're going to lose money on it. That doesn't make sense. But there's that aspect of intangible. So think about that a little bit.
Okay. I'm somewhere in between Director Weed and Director Huang. I think some of the intangibles are bigger reasons why we're moving towards AMI, and a lot of the customer satisfaction that we'll get from that is a big reason why I'm quite in favor of the project. I was curious, and if you're going to cover this in the later part of the presentation, we can wait until then, but I'm curious what kind of the UAT testing is going to look like, and I'm curious kind of what that is going to look like, and what access those customers will have to, Sure. Yeah. Let me know if you want to respond immediately. I was trying to key in on when to chime in. Yeah, the UAT testing. I guess what was presented is sort of the foundations of the AMI system, identifying the needs and the value that AMI will provide. Is sort of one of the foundational building blocks. And we're stepping through the project with you guys somewhat live. And so certainly some of the concerns that Director Weed and Director Huang have about the financial versus non-financial aspects, we're aware of those, and our risk management tool is one way to capture those. And I agree that there's a lot of non-financial benefits that AMI provides. And it may be hard to put dollar values against non-financial benefits, but we can certainly daylight them so that we can make an informed decision on them. User acceptance testing, so if needs, what you'll hear in the following agenda items is the alternatives analysis. So the needs assessment really identifies the functional requirements that we want from the AMI system. The alternatives analysis will take a look at the technology. We haven't got there yet. That's a future task for us. And so we'll look at that functional technology, the technology needs. Our assessment next. We'll take a look at what we're going to do. But as far as the user acceptance testing, we believe that there's technology, multiple vendors worth of technology out there that can meet the needs that we've identified. So that, that's kind of my gut reaction, and I think you may share that. So that that's good news that we're heading in the right direction. The UAT testing, user acceptance testing, is really testing that these functional requirements that we've identified that we want our AMI system to do, that it's there. And so our proof of concept will make sure that all these needs that we've identified will build tests to prove that it can do that. We'll both build specifications to make sure, to request that it does that, and then we'll also test that it does that. And the proof of concept phase will allow us to roll in any deficiencies, I guess, and fix any deficiencies before we go to the full deployment. So I hope that answers the question. We don't have the user acceptance test forms right now, but we are working towards that.
What's the average remaining life on the current meters that we have?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's somewhat of a mixed bag, and between we have some new and some very old passing end of life. As the board may remember, the meter replacement program was put on hold for a couple of years. So so that's something to keep in the back of mind.
Mr. Peterson have an answer for us? It looks like you want to see
We-
something.
No, I was just talking about the outline of the presentation.
Yes, we have the meter data and the meter population data, and we have done a pass through that and analyzed some uncertainty in that data that we have. So we're not ready to share the results on our assessment of the meter population just yet. But we will be talking to that point further on. Yeah, in the project, in the presentation, I should say.
I think I'll hold some of the rest of my questions as we go through.
There's a couple of questions I have regarding the presentation. Not to get into comments yet. The first one was, I'm sure we're going to have some type of firewall installed into this to protect the customer accounts. That's like absolutely vital as to the shaming factor of what happened with East Bay Mud when they actually screwed up. But we cannot let ourselves get hacked and have somebody get in and get into our customer accounts, and the next thing you know, they're being published all over the internet. My account, if it happens to get out there, hey, I'm a board member, so what? I gotta live with it. But there are people with private accounts, and that's the way it should stay. And shaming has seemed to be a way of attacking people today, and it's very, very effective. And I'm not particularly fond of that idea. For whatever one group decides that they're going to pick on. I noticed that remote shutoff seemed to be only in the future. I don't know if that's, I don't know how hard it is to institute something like that, but I would think that would be something we would do right away. There's a strong benefit, I believe, for that. Maybe it's just maybe that's only me. I do agree with Director Weed that this is a rather expensive project. It's a move into a future technology. And I'm trying to think how to put this in perspective. And at some point, you have to step up and decide what you're going to do. I think it's my youngest brother has a book from my grandfather from 1910. They were talking about engines, automobiles. I don't remember what they called it in there. They were discussing the benefits of all three: steam, electric, and gas. I think throw in diesel, maybe all four. In 1910, they didn't know where they were going to go. And are we in the same situation here? look at it that way. Yes, there's this meter that's ultra low, I guess, that measures. If that becomes the path, we certainly don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we can't get into that path. It'd be really nice if we could put ourselves into a situation where we can morph into that path. If technology changes, this thing here is going to be obsolete in another couple of years. This system we're talking about here is going to be around for more than a couple of years. So I think if we go into that looking at it that way, that we need something that, yes, it's going to be around, but we want to be able to have it morph so it doesn't become obsolete. But we also have a responsibility. Neighborhood next door was the internet stuff I remember looking. I think it was Hayward was starting to implement something. Am I correct on that? Hayward, I think, has started this or tried implementing some electronic metering or
Correct, yeah. Hayward are more than halfway through their AMI deployment.
It was fascinating, the comments coming from the customers. They weren't very pleasant. Some of them were our customers. One of the interesting thing was, they don't even know how we bill them. One guy's on there saying, oh, they never come by. I haven't seen somebody read my meter in a year. So there is a complete lack of understanding in the customer base. They all understand PG&E in their little box inside their house. Their water meter, they happen to see a meter reader coming out there. And yes, in our rate hearing, everybody's praising this. The neighborhood next door, they weren't exactly praising it. Call it the tin hat syndrome, I don't know, big brother. It was fascinating to take a look at. I don't know if the comments are still there, but I didn't chime in. So anyway, I think we need to move ahead. At some point, you got to move ahead. I work for a railroad, and we use literally metal plate signs where we put the train numbers in the side of the train. What are we waiting for? I keep hearing every day, this is Silicon Valley. They're opening the Salesforce Tower, if I understand tonight. So this isn't rocket science, but it is a $25 million project, which is a lot of money for us. We need to get it. We need to get it right. But I think we also need to press forward and do it. If we don't, we could go last. I mean, it's okay if we want to go last, but I tell you what, if we go last, we're going to probably hear about it.
I'm going to withhold comments for right now. I'd like to see us get through the entire presentation. We're already 1 hour in, and we've got a long way to go tonight.
Can I ask a question I didn't before?
Yes.
We have a current system. Could you briefly describe what our current system is that can remotely monitor 400 plus managed irrigation accounts? And the next question is, there's an Internet of Things coming. Water meters strike me as being a thing. Why shouldn't we be part of the Internet of Things? They're going to be established legally or somebody else. Why do we need a unique system? Sethy.
Right. Our current AMI system, I think, is question number one. So we do have a pilot. It was of 400 meters. My understanding that is the technology that it was built on, and that our understanding of AMI at the time perhaps wasn't as sophisticated, and the technology that it was built on, I believe, is now obsolete. So the status of that system is that it's not currently being used for billing or meter reading.
Thank you. That's the first time I've heard that we were not using it.
Ben, you really need to speak up.
I'm sorry. And question number 2 was,
We have, the Internet of Things is on
Internet
this.
of Things.
We'll be here in 2 years, we're told. Water meter or not, water meter's a thing, why can't we hook up to the Internet of Things?
Yeah, if you don't mind for that one, I'll just say that for that plus a couple of the other technical issues and thoughts that have been brought up, we are addressing those a little bit later. So you'll see kind of, and that really rolls into the alternatives analysis. And so you'll see about how we're planning on approaching the alternatives analysis, and that's where we intend to address those types of questions. And in terms of the business case, just one other context item. So we have a business case for AMI that was presented to the board some time ago. That was based upon a great deal of assumptions. And so what this process is doing, you're seeing what's happening is we're sort of fleshing out many of those assumptions about how we truly would use AMI as opposed to what we could do, and sort of taking a look at very specific financial benefits and so forth. We're actually looking at, okay, with this possibility, how could we actually implement it? In what ways would we look to improve all those categories that you saw using this technology? So with that, plus what we'll learn through the alternatives analysis, at that point then we can sort of recost what this system would cost, and then compare that to the benefits. So that's a little bit down the road. So we don't have a new business case. Right now we're simply working off the old business case and fleshing it out. So we're sort of at the initial phases of that. We don't have a great deal of detail about those technical issues yet, but that's part of the plan. So I just wanted to mention that real quick so we can kind of step into the next item.
And I just wanted to add to your response to the status of the pilot. At that time, operations worked closely with finance on setting up this initial pilot. We sought out large meters because that's where we wanted to go to monthly billing and reap the financial benefits very quickly. We also wanted to, there was a concern at that time, this was a number of years ago, that when PG&E did its outreach or lack thereof, we're afraid of the radiation from the communication devices that are automatically sending billing information to PG&E. So we wanted to avoid that, so we concentrated on business customers only. Scattered throughout the service area, we wanted to see how we could minimize the initial capital costs. That was, at that time, the technology, there was 2 types. One with large, heavy infrastructure up front, and another technology that was less capital intensive in the beginning. And so we wanted to test it out and get our learn from that technology. I never saw a final report. I don't know if that exists. But one of the problems that we had was the AMI system wouldn't talk to our customer service infrastructure, the Cayenta. I think it took 6 to 9 months to get the 2 systems to talk together, and so that was a major lessons learned. So there was a lot of other lessons learned. Again, I don't know what all they were, and it was used for a number of years. We worked closely with IT, trying to resolve those issues. And I'm not sure if finance actually ever sent the bills through the AMI system to the customers. I don't know what happened there either.
It was never integrated with billing.
Okay.
And at 400 meters spread throughout the service territory, there's actually not any real efficiency to be gained from that, right? So in terms of meter reading or billing, it was just because you're not eliminating like a set route or something like that because it's spread throughout. And at 400 out of 83,000 plus meters, right?
And what Jonathan is mentioning, that is correct, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to exercise and learn about the technology to minimize the infrastructure costs because it was enormous.
It was also suggested that we could do water budgets potentially with our large landscape contractors, and this would be a methodology to implement the water budget where it makes sense with the larger managed and big irrigation accounts. but this is the first. How much money did we spend and we never used it?
Director, let me
Okay.
bring us back on
Thank you.
track here. Ben and to our guests, we received the draft of this presentation at the end of last week, so you can assume we've all done our homework, and we really do have a lot on our agenda to get through tonight, so I would kindly ask you to speed it up.
Right. Okay. So our public outreach plan. Great. So very early on in the project scoping for this project, customer engagement was a key benefit and an important goal of the AMI system. And so we're currently developing a preliminary public outreach plan. You can probably sense by the parallel path between our needs assessment and the preliminary public outreach plan that we feel is pretty important. We're working on it straight up front to make sure that we can all those great benefits that can be leveraged out of AMI, to make sure that we can make the customer aware, make sure that we have a good plan for connecting with the customer to maximize the education with the public. So our preliminary public outreach plan will be the guiding document for phase 1 and leading into phase 2. It'll be updated as we go through into deployment in phase 2 and 3. And it's really, the purpose of this plan is to make the public aware of the benefits, and then as we move into deployment, also make the public aware of the anticipated customer experience. There's not a lot of projects similar to this that touch every customer like this project will. And so we really want to make sure that the public are aware of what's coming and how great it is. We also want to encourage participation, provide feedback channels. So our planning effort is working on the types of channels for public outreach and to enhance the ACWD brand. As we saw in the strategic goal, we want to promote the ACWD brand. All right, so I'll turn it over to Scott, and he'll walk through the rest of the section.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you all for having us here. So, as Ben alluded to, the impetus for starting this planning process in parallel with something as early as the needs assessment is that we feel, the project team feels very strongly that this is a project that is being done for the public, not to the public. And so it's important that the public feel like they've been along since the beginning, and that they have an opportunity to understand what's happening as it's happening, and also to provide meaningful feedback at a time before it's too late for their feedback to somehow be incorporated into and guide our program. But at this point, we also know that there's a lot of unknowns, and we've gotten into a little bit of that today. So because there's so much enthusiasm and excitement about this project, we feel it's really important to identify some key simple messages that we all can share and all carry with us, so that when we're talking about this program, casually or formally, in the short term, while so many of the technical elements are still being determined, that we can do so with one voice. And especially for a project that's as complex and large as this, it's really important that we all be consistent in our communication so that we don't end up causing confusion and concern and other sort of confusion that could end up working against us to become counterproductive to the rest of the project. So I think it's been passed out. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So you received a handout. This is sort of an initial list of reference information we provided with some questions. To be clear, this is not a final FAQ. This is not intended to be a document that we would email out to a constituent, although all this information is certainly public. That's why we're sharing it. But again, the idea here is to, given what we know at this point, here are some key messages that really focus on what is the technology, the whole project, what are we doing, and how does it connect to the mission of the district, and then also really highlighting some of the benefits of the project. And so we provide that to you for your reference. And lastly, I've been asked to talk a little bit about branding. There's a real opportunity here because, as Ben mentioned, this project will impact the entire district, all district customers. It's a great opportunity to reinforce what is impressively actually already a very strong brand that the district has. We were reviewing the survey data from the last customer survey that we received, and we were really sort of struck by the fact that even your negatives were positive, from consumer stakeholders, and that's not something that we see very often when we go and meet with organizations such as this district. So the awareness of the brand was also extremely strong, and we think that there's a lot of value there. And so because capitalizing on the existing goodwill of the brand, but also capitalizing on this opportunity to really strongly connect the brand to this project, we strongly recommend that we pursue sort of a branding approach to this project that really connects it back to it being a program of the district, rather than creating a new logo and all kinds of some new flashy thing that's totally different and could distance itself, frankly, from the district. We recommend what we call typically a lock-up type of a branding arrangement, where it will be clearly identified, and we're still developing it, but a program of the district. So it's just very clear that the district get credit, more or less, for lack of a better word, for this initiative that it's taken. So those are the branding goals. And then talking about branding versus a logo, I alluded to this a little bit, but a brand is really more than just a logo. A lot of people confuse the two, but a logo is just a visual representation of a brand or a company or organization. When we talk about brand, we're really talking about how people feel when they think about the district. And so we're approaching branding from that perspective. So as I said, we've looked at sort of the options of do nothing and don't brand this project at all. Come up with something that's totally flashy and out there and totally different, that will be possibly overly distracting, but more importantly, takes away from the value of connecting it to the district brand. And then the sort of Goldilocks scenario, the just right in the middle, which is where we're aiming, which is to provide some unique identity to the initiative. You're spending a lot of money and time on this. This is something that the public needs to know is occurring, but also connect that very strongly to the value that you already have in your district brand. So that's sort of our overall approach as to how we're approaching the planning process, and have been alluded to the fact that the plan's still very much in development. So I'll turn it back to Ben for any questions.
All right. So are there any questions on the public outreach planning, I guess, is done today? Otherwise, I know that this sort of desire to continue.
You've done some other AMI programs. In some cases, it's on a subscription basis only. For a nominal cost, someone can have paid for the privilege or be given the privilege of a request of being able to read their water meter on their cell phone. How many people actually ask for that service as a percentage of the customer base?
Yeah, I don't have any data on me on that. We could certainly find out.
It would be in the low single digits, would it not?
I truly would be speculating. I don't.
So I just have a recommendation on the FAQ.
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that you look at it a little bit more from our customer's point of view. One of the questions I would say missing is, will my information be saved? How does this benefit? We talk very high level in cost efficiency, operational efficiency, slightly different point of view. From if you're a customer, you want to follow this project, the first question is always, what is it for me? Right? So that's just a recommendation, think about it.
That's my own.
Very quickly, just be ready to address the question of, we're doing this to get more money from the customer. That's going to be one of the questions.
Okay. We have a question from a member of our public.
From the public.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. The question is a member of the public, and this one's not about cost, although Mr. Director Weed's point, I'm still holding over $2,500 versus $25 million. they're having a tough time with that, but how many these are successful. But I was wondering, would this project have the capability of monitoring in the event of a disaster, say an earthquake, and suddenly you have broken mains throughout the district, and so some areas are going to be without water, and some areas are going to be with water, and to establish some priority for their maintenance and repair work that needs to be done in the event that the Hayward fault goes off, which I understand is any day now.
Yeah, great question. I'll certainly take a part of that, but the greater disaster recovery plan of the district, I might pass that question through. So the AMI technology does afford a few tools for identifying leaks, and certainly big system leaks. And the project team definitely identified the pressure monitoring, which would identify large decreases in system pressure, is certainly something that this system can monitor, as well as identifying constraints in the system. So yes, it is one tool in our quiver for we'll add to our quiver for disaster recovery.
You know, I think we need to clarify Director Weed's citation of only $2,500 in losses per year. It's not the figure that I'm familiar with.
We were asked what the cost to the district was in making payments for when people put in claims who lost water. It totaled to about $2,500 a year.
We've had cases where it was $2,500 by itself.
So we get only reimbursed a percentage of that.
Maybe I can provide a little more clarification. So we have numerous instances where customers call with a question about their bill. To them, it seems, unusually high. John, do you have an idea of how many of those calls do we receive? It's in the order of...
The number of calls that are very large dollar amounts is small.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just, I could quickly look this up, but off the top of my head, I couldn't give you a number. But I would guess that we get on the order of a couple hundred calls a month that are some type of high bill complaint or a potential leak or something like that. Most of those are going to be relatively small from a district sort of wide perspective.
So in most cases, the customer is contacting us to say, hey, is this number real? I don't remember using this much water. They may not have even had a leak. And either the customer eventually pays that bill, or we work out some sort of bill payment plan if it's higher than normal. But there are a number of customers where they have a leak, and we have a sort of leak adjustment program, and the leak is confirmed, and the number that Director Weeds is quoting is in the right ballpark, but is definitely a relatively small subset of the kind of inquiries that we get where, the customer is never quite sure of where the leak occurred, or if they had a leak, or why there was use, or doesn't remember filling their pool, or whatever. And so, in terms of an actual dollar outlay, I think Director Weed is probably in the right ballpark per year, but in terms of dealing with the customer engagement issues and being able to say, hey, on December 21st, we see unusually high water use, oh yeah, I filled my pool that day, I forgot, or whatever. That's the kind of benefit that we see. But and then the other real benefit is the true up that we currently can't really do accurately. So there will be a time where the amount of water that's unaccounted for is going to be limited by the state in terms of how much that can be, because you may have a leaky system. When you bill your customers every 2 months, and basically that's a 60-day cycle for us, it's almost impossible to true up the production numbers versus the customer use number. So it's a significant source of potential error. So it makes it hard for us to diagnose exactly how tight our system is and what our leaks are. And that can equate to a significant amount of water. Even just a few percent is an enormous amount of water. So those are some of the, we're not getting into the, I think the discussion today, this agenda item, is so that the project team can kind of outline the approach that we're taking. The board has made the decision to move forward with this, so that's the assumption that staff is going with. And certainly we want to get those questions from board members along the way so that you feel comfortable that you're working from accurate information and provide the appropriate level of detail that the directors would like to see. But the way I look at this is, this approach is, okay, what do we want AMI to accomplish for us? And then the system will be designed to accomplish those goals. The technology will continuously change. We'll try to future-proof the system as best as we can, but you're still looking at a design life of 10, 15, 20 years where you will get those benefits that you're paying for. And that's the goal as I see it, if that helps the board kind of deal with some of these issues.
Well, we're going to be hitting it later, and I'll just make a note for future reference. We talked about 1 or 2% on the loss of the system-wide. But the meters themselves we're using, and they'll be the issue, are 4 to 8%. That dwarfs that. And we have no way to measure the workflows currently given our current meters. But but there is 2 issues that strikes me. We talked about the operational capabilities of the district to be able to manage our system, which are meters on our system. First, but the proposal for us is not that. It's to do a universal 83,000 meter read, as opposed to, we could probably monitor our system with the 400 meters, so we currently have developed the capability to never utilize by putting it on our system as opposed to at the customer.
Director Weed, I just have to make a comment. You're making an effort to walk us backwards when the board has already made a decision to move forwards.
We do stupid things, and this is another thing where leading-edge technology has been burned time and time again, and this is another, I'm pointing out, leading-edge technology. We're rushing into something, and with a 15, at least 16-year, maybe 30-year payback, and the technology over the next few years is going to change dramatically.
We sincerely appreciate your dissenting view. We're trying to move forward here. Back to Ben.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of good discussion. Hopefully, this next section will address some of the technical questions and concerns that came up. So our alternatives analysis, whereas the needs assessment identifies the functional requirements that we want out of the system, the alternatives analysis reviews the technology requirements that we want from the system. So our approach to the alternatives analysis is to do a top-to-bottom AMI technology assessment, all available technology. We want to investigate those, be able to report back. And our approach to the alternatives analysis is focused on an elimination of technologies that we don't want to see the district end up with, as opposed to a tabletop exercise that selects a single vendor or a single technology. We want to maintain that competitiveness in the marketplace and make sure that we end up with getting rid of the type of technology that we just couldn't live with, and the technologies that remain will still be included in the bidding process. So we grouped again, this is a future task. This is work that the project team has yet to do. So I grouped the technologies in these 4 main buckets: field devices, meters, etc., communication technologies. AMI synergies is not exactly a technology per se, but it will certainly have a lot of influence on the technology outcome of our alternative analysis outcome. And then also our IT software environment, looking at the technologies available to us there. Right, so if this is a little view of our service area, the field technologies, such as our consumption meters at each house, there's really 3 main groups and alternatives that we'll be looking at there. Meter types, there's been a lot of, well, there's been certainly some advancement in meter technology over the last 5-10 years. We want to take a look at the different types of meters and their application to the district. The baseline being, of course, that we need a population of meters that is AMI compatible. Likewise, register types. Registers being the little black device sitting on top of the meter right there. There's a lot of new functionality incorporated into those meters to be able to automatically send alarms or to flag certain types of consumption. So we'll take a look at those. And then pressure sensors and other types of sensors. I guess the other groups of technologies are somewhat new. In the last 5 years, there's been new types of sensors that have been added to the AMI Internet of Things, basically. However, the district has a lot of experience, decades of experience with pressure sensors. So I think we're in pretty good shape to look at those. Communication technologies, there's really 4 main groups of communication technologies available by an AMI system: licensed and unlicensed RF, cellular, and low-powered LAN, so LoRa type alliances, which is another similar system. It's a hosted system. It's a network as a service type system. AMI synergies. Should we go down the pathway of a fixed network, then we're going to make sure that we have enough siting available. So looking and talking with our local partners and local utilities to ensure that we have enough siting for data collectors. And then looking at leasing. So whether it's us leasing space on someone else's existing AMI network or us leasing space on our AMI network, getting an understanding for the lay of the land. And then finally, IT technologies. So one piece of that is hosting. So whether we want to host the software environment on-premise, or whether we want some sort of software as a service, cloud storage service, and the pros and cons of those. 2 arrangements. MDMS is really the software platform. It's the meter data management system, which is where the data is stored, the reporting tools to present this data, and the analytics packages that will analyze the data that's coming in that can help us achieve some of those needs that we identified. And of course, the customer portal is another viewpoint presentment tool of that data. So we're looking at alternatives available to us there. Evaluation factors. This is a draft list of the types of evaluation factors. Security is certainly on the list. Obsolescence is certainly on the list. Perhaps not every one of these factors applies to every category of technologies, but as the project team walks through this alternatives analysis, we'll certainly be looking at life cycle costs, feasibility, security, obsolescence, compatibility with AMI, and market share. we don't want to end up with a Betamax. I think that was brought up. Okay, so I've been through that. Hopefully that gets us back on track a little for the rest of the workshop. Are there any questions about upcoming alternatives analysis tasks? I just want to make sure that everyone's happy that we're looking at.
Go ahead.
I'm trying to... In your last approach, can we truly phase this in where we build the infrastructure first, towers? And is that not the biggest risk that we have from a political standpoint? And once you have that, then you can, maybe a year from now, you'll have new technologies that are being developed as we speak, because this is a rapidly evolving 5G technology. But building the infrastructure for the 5G is really the critical path, the long point in the critical path. Would that be a correct synopsis? And could we do that without having to make any of the other decisions?
So I think that's a great question, and I think that's not the current plan, just because the prior work that was done by UtiliWorks, one of their specific recommendations was do not phase it in, because there are all kinds of organizational impacts to stringing out an implementation like this with processes being done in parallel and so forth. However, that said, I would look to our EMA folks and ask, is that something that we can analyze as part of our alternative analysis, sort of the phase-in approach?
Sure. So having a phased-in approach, we can definitely include as an alternative. The one thing that I think that people have touched on is this technology does evolve. It probably has a 5 to 6 year life. So it has a 5 to 6 year life. So if you would deploy it over that 5 or 6 years, you'll have consistent technology that'll last you the full 20 years and provide consistent customer service for all your customers. If you string it out longer, then there's a risk of that technology that you deployed and built the data collectors on would become obsolete, and there'd be another another technology would then need to be looked at. So you'd have a system with partial deployment.
Well, I think we missed the key point here. Baseline, you've got to build a series of towers. That's non-tech, just building the structural location, the siting for your receivers. I suggest that that is the highest risk we have from a political standpoint, because we have to get permission to build. But even with our being a special district, we've seen it takes months of hearings on just a single siting. And we've had the experience with the Bill Torch bill where the radio came through, they're going to build this killer tower in my backyard, was hitting the radio. So that's coming with 5G. But building that infrastructure and owning it, I see no risk financially to that because it's an extraordinarily valuable asset. And once you get that done, then the rest of it can be implemented, as you suggest. There are arguments to implement it as quickly as we can and put all the meters in if that's your objective. If it's your objective to operate our system with remote capabilities and information in real time from a contingency operations standpoint or in real time, that's a separate measure, much lower cost, and a small fraction of the number of meters. I think that would be my priority as a district, because I don't see us having a need to get less people leaving water bills on a cell phone. But so that's the suggestion I'm making, is that we look at just putting in the towers.
I think we actually have sorry.
Go ahead.
I think we have designed into our phase one scope propagation studies for all the different types of available communication systems. And so we're identifying where we'll need siting, and certainly where there's holes in the siting will be be analyzing health on
Okay,
the whole.
that's purely
And you're right,
study.
the vertical infrastructure is a key piece in that.
Studies are cheap. Infrastructure can be expensive and particularly time consuming. That's why I'm suggesting you get the infrastructure built first before you make a decision on what type of equipment and other things you need.
Let me see if I can help out answering that question here too. Okay, so I have experience with microwave products in both licensed and unlicensed frequencies. I spent quite a bit of time in the cellular industry. And so I have this natural inclination to want to take advantage of existing infrastructure. And trying to leverage the cellular system to me is savings up front from having to invest in what Director Weed is saying, where you need all the site acceptances for microwave dishes and everything. I would just like to make 2 points for the overall presentation right now. I like where you're moving forward. I think that, like Director Huang said and Director Weed, we really need to see the business case on each one of these different types of technologies, implementations, whatever it might be. By the way, at our Tri-City GIS, JPA that we have with the Union Sanitary District and our cities, we had a presentation last week on the rollout of 4G and 5G cellular antennas. And they're going down to the picocell throughout our community right now, and working with all the cities to put these micro antennas up on stoplights, on light poles. They're going everywhere, and it literally is going down to the picocell, and it's rolling out right now from all the cellular providers. And knowing the technology, we don't have to wait for 5G. If you've got 4G out there right now, all the cellular providers will upgrade or migrate their customers to the new technology. So I don't see that as a great worry. I wanted to also ask, which I didn't see here, I would really like to see comparative case studies of what has been rolled out in other communities. And Joel, I trust you have a lot of experience with this, but I did forward to the staff, I think it was about a dozen or so cities that went through exactly what we're going through, cities or water districts. And I think like the city of Modesto was looking at fixed versus cellular and finally went with cellular. Scotts Valley did, a city across the bay did, I think it was Belmont. And then there were about a dozen RFPs that were just initiated since last fall, almost in the same time frame that we're working, with decisions that had to be made by their boards or city councils by June or July of this summer. And so it was interesting to go through these RFPs and see that everybody all of a sudden is working on the same activities, and it's all boiling down to a choice between fixed or cellular. So what I did before our January meeting was I was doing some homework and went to the business units of the cellular providers that are focused on what they see as a truly financially rewarding emerging market for meters in the utility industry. I'll just pick out one, Verizon. They have a business unit that's focused exactly on this. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And they have business case studies that I think would help better inform the board. They've got business consultants, technical consultants that can talk to the different projects that they have going on around the country. And what I like most about going direct to these business units is they have the financial business cases for why, of course, they're promoting their own technology, but why cellular might make a preferred, be a preferred route to go. So I always like to see comparative information and look to what other people are doing in other communities. But there's a lot of activity suddenly going on in the last year. Started about 3 years ago. But I've turned over all those RFPs to staff.
I've chased down a few of them, but not all of them yet. But I too am interested in, talking to other different agencies and learning from their experience too.
Yeah, so in my opinion, keep plugging forward.
Okay. So we're pretty close. I'll just close this out if that's okay. So the board input timeline. Out of the January board meeting, we put together a schedule of milestones where we'd be checking in with the board. So I haven't shown the ones that we've done. This is just updated to what's coming. So we'll be touching base with the various, with a number of different committees. But really the two main board items up there are, to the full board, will be the recommendation of the meter field survey in June, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit. And then in September, we hope to be back with the alternative analysis results. That's our estimate right now, which will start to wrap up phase one. So in the June board meeting, we'll be recommending the award of the field meter field survey. The scope of that work is to do a survey of approximately 2% of our small meters, 20% of our medium-sized meters, and 100% of our large meters. And we've identified some uncertainty in the meter population data that we have. And so we want to make sure that those meter classes that have the highest impact to the uncertainty, to the finances of the project, that we get a good handle on those. I've definitely heard today that we need to come back to the business case, and I know that, and we are working towards that, and this will be a huge help in doing that. Otherwise, we'll be coming back with ranges of unknowns. So this task was identified for phase 2. We'd like to accelerate it into phase 1. It's industry best practice to survey. There's not only the meter itself and the data about the meter that we would like to shore up, but also the meter box and meter box condition. All of these factors will have financial implications to our business case. It's a long lead item. It takes about the work we've scoped out will probably take around 3 months, and so it's a critical path item for phase 2 as it sits. So accelerating that will help move it off the critical path for us. And as I mentioned, this sort of statistical approach to surveying certain meter classes will help us address some of the risk that was identified in the risk register, which is really some of that uncertainty, which will present itself in the financial planning for the project.
I'd like to make one other point real quick before it escapes me. Jim brought up the issue about security.
Yes.
And one of the features that I like about the cellular system is that everybody's using Qualcomm CDMA technology, which encrypts all the data and makes it a very secure system. That's why people don't have their iPhones being hacked. You know, even the FBI has a hard time, once they recover a CDMA-based phone. If you're operating like East Bay Mud was, well, then it's very easy to go in and hack the system if you know what the frequency is and other attributes of the system. So just something to think about, because if we can communicate that to our customers, and that they're already using the same technology, you know, on their cell phones, I think that is it's part of your branding, it's part of convincing, and it overcomes the objections about running on a proprietary system. Yeah. Are you done?
We are, yeah, so, we'll see you in September. Okay.
So why don't we start from this end, and go that way this time?
Okay.
I'm done.
You're done? Okay. One other comment on, it came up. Remember, the public is, I know it's kind of far-fetched, but the concept of looking for some dollars through disaster preparedness, in that if we had all these meters out there, I agree, there may be an opportunity that if we could identify in our system where we have major failures in pressure rather rapidly, that's a disaster preparedness issue. And we might be able to gather up some money from that, the disaster preparedness funds that are, I don't know how much is still out there, but if it's out there, hey, we might as well try. We've been pretty successful with other stuff. And I believe we've got to press ahead. I don't know if I'll be looking at my meter on my cell phone. Actually, I might. Because I have a hard time getting into my computer to look at my bill. It might be easier to get it on my cell phone. But, as I said earlier, can somebody tell me when we started this system of reading meters? About how many years ago was it, approximately? When we started our billing system based on meters?
What I was told, 85 years?
Well, I think we acquired a distribution utility in the 30s.
So
I would
we're
imagine
talking-
we had meters back then.
Sometime, probably, who knows? We can't even tell when we started this system of meter reading. Now, yes, this is a lot of money. And who knows if people are going to use their cell phone. Yes, some people are going to do that. But I'm probably one of the few people in the room that could say he's been transported in a Rambler station wagon. Why do I say that? Because Teslas are built. How far from where we're sitting right now? The plant's like right there. You can almost throw a rock at it. Across the bay, there are autonomous cars. I don't know if they're taking them off the road right now, but I've seen them all over the place. I have no desire to own an autonomous car or drive in one. But that doesn't mean that's not where technology's going. And at some point, the ISR is going to come down here and look at this district and say, hey, why are you guys still reading meters the same way you did in 1930? You're Silicon Valley. They built Teslas 5 miles from your headquarters. It's in your district. And you haven't advanced? What are you waiting for? Now, that could be a really good argument for some city that's not doing meters. Hey, we're waiting. But no. Yes, we may get something that may not be 100% technology shiny, the brand new thing out, the i25 phone. But maybe having an i10 or an i8, not such a bad idea, instead of waiting for the i25. Proceed ahead, please.
Director Akbari.
I mean, overall, I am kind of fine with the roadmap that's been laid out. Like Director Sethy mentioned, when the presentation was sent to us, the two things that I wrote down as big concerns for me were the financial aspect, so I'm excited to see the business case at our next presentation, and then security. That is, I mean, going to going out into the community, when we have to sell this to them, I can already foresee that security is going to be one of the big concerns. And so I want to make sure that that is properly addressed. And so I know it is one of the things that you guys have highlighted as part of your analysis, but I want to, from my perspective, those are the two things that I'm going to be paying most attention to. There was mention that it would be nice to have some user stories of previous districts that have already adopted AMI and the benefits that they've seen, or the benefits that were not realized that were pitched to them. I would like to see that information as well. And then I wanted to actually get a little bit of feedback from you. Do you agree that AMI is very much leading edge technology at this point, or would you say that there has been some testing and proof that it works so far, and it's not as much bleeding edge technology as much as it is just improvements on an existing technology?
Yeah, I certainly have the sense of that. Joel is our AMI subject matter expert, so he's probably seen the full development of AMI over the last 20 years.
Sure. So AMI technology is based on an RF signal, and so the predecessor to an AMI system was a mobile AMR system, and those have been around for over 25 years. AMI, the only difference is now you have fixed data collectors located to collect the similar type readings. So the technology has been around for about 8 to 10 years. Over the last 3 years, most water utilities are basically taking AMR off the table and just looking at AMI. So the technologies that we're evaluating have all been deployed in large scale and are quite proven. So some of the risks related to the actual technology are actually associated with the installation process. If you set it up incorrectly on the installation side, that's a lot of the risks, but the technology itself is quite proven.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I think that is important for us to, as part of our pitch to the community, that they know that this is something that has been adopted by other agencies, that has been tested out, and that we are not on just implementing something that's brand new, never been tested, because there is a tremendous amount of risk there. But again, a sentiment that's already been shared, I'm not opposed to us being one of the agencies that is a leader in implementing newer technology. I see that as being an advantage to our agency, and I wouldn't want us to hold back on implementing a technology like this just because every technology is going to be iterated on. Every technology is going to be improved. If we are comfortable with where the technology is today and the benefits that it provides our agency today, then I would be comfortable moving forward with that. So that's my feedback.
So the board has voted to go ahead with AMI, and part of our discussion earlier when we start down this path is we have some criteria, including the business case and the alternative analysis. So I'm definitely looking forward to the results of them. I will put a caveat though. I believe in AMI. I think it makes sense. And for all of the reasons that's highlighted, I believe it's a good idea. But the number has to prove out both tangible, actual financial saving, and the intangible, as in customer service. It has to prove out to us before we can proceed, because we represent a bunch of customers behind us, and we need to be able to justify that the money is well spent. So I'm definitely looking forward to it. There are some comments about phasing. I trust, based on your response, you will be looking at that. as the alternative analysis, we could have another discussion about how you should proceed. But I actually like the path you have laid out, so thank you.
Right. Can I clarify that? I'm sorry. So the phasing, there's two concepts I had. One was more related to the project delivery timeline. And certainly you need to get that network up and running before you can start reading meters. So certainly the delivery timeline would take that into account. But as far as phasing, let's just do this this community
right.
and ignore the rest of the district.
So I'm going to take a guess. In your alternative analysis, you are probably going to look at infrastructure and going, we have all these technology options that we could leverage on existing systems by the utility companies, or we will have to build all these towers. My guess is in your alternative analysis, you will flesh out that phasing in terms of do we do towers first or not. You will actually flesh out in there just how practical it is.
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to pre-address Director Reed's concern is that I think this concern will be addressed as part of your alternative analysis because you are going to look at different communication technologies, for lack of a better word. And at some point, it will come out in your evaluation. So I'm sure they will be addressing that.
Okay. Well, thank you. I believe that we will eventually have remote reading of meters and the ability to remotely turn them on and off. We started the question here with need. And I see no need from the viewpoint of the consumer for an AMI. Our affordability indexes, water is very affordable in our district. From the district standpoint, we have surplus water. We don't have a shortage. We have excess capacity. We can address rate issues by changing our rate structure. We balance match our variable costs with our variable revenues and our fixed costs with our fixed revenues. We don't do that now. That could be done and many of these issues go away. There are advantages, I think greater advantages from the district to have remote reading of our service area and pressures, and that is a much smaller project, smaller context. But I would ask you early on to take, Director Sethy brought the issues up, determine if we're going with a cellular system, a fixed system, or I'll give you a third option, because Irvine Ranch is holding off on this whole discussion. They expect Bluetooth because they expect the utility, the electrical utility, which has 2 smart meters now at every facility, gas and electrical, to also pick up the water meters. And they have the potential to even do your billing and take care of your disadvantage. So you don't even have to worry about the billing part of it. Eventually, I think we'll see in a few years where the electric and gas utilities, currently on gas remote reading, 50% of the hits, anomalies, are water related. So there is a degree of crossover there. The type of meter, I think we want to take a look at fairly quickly and decide if we're going to wait until their reliability levels for pulse technology comes along, where we don't have this non-revenue water ranging from anywhere from 4 to 6% of your total supply. That's a big number, but it's on the customer side. And right now it's not an economic driver. So you can save money by changing some of our practices. Because given the reality and the surplus of water and the cheapness of the water, we don't have to read the meters every 2 months. We can bill monthly, which is a good idea, but we could read them every 3, 4, 6 months because the standard consumption of profiles are incredibly consistent for the vast, upper 90% of your customers. And then true them up. PG&E has done that on the electrical side before they got into the smart meter business. We have other options that are a hell of a lot cheaper, $25 million. And because this technology, as you point out, is only going to have a life 4 to 5 years, 4 to 5 years from now, we're looking at a totally different set of options for the investment at a much lower cost if patterns in the past have followed. That's my take.
And I want to thank you and EMA for giving us a really nice presentation today. I'd like to close on a trivia question which just popped into my head. I'll provide a special gift to somebody if they can answer the question. So, CDMA stands for Code Division Multiple Access, and it's an encryption technology, the most commonly used in cellular. So, who has the original patent on CDMA? And it will shock you. Anybody?
Am I sitting close to somebody?
No. It's a woman.
Oh, that's right. She was on the news. She developed the CDMA technology, but she did not have it. Right? What did she tell you?
She filed the
She
patent.
did.
Was she one of the original NASA ladies in Hidden Figures?
No.
No. She was on the paper. Her story was on the paper.
What paper?
I read like 6-7 papers a day.
Okay, well, I'll give the answer because it's very interesting, and I will tease you. Go look up the story on the internet, on Google. The patent holder on the original CDMA technology is Hedy Lamarr, the famous actress.
She's the actress.
In the 1930s, she was called the most beautiful woman in the world. And she emigrated from Eastern Europe, eventually to London, New York, and then to Hollywood. But she was very concerned about the Nazis being able to intercept communications quite easily. And without any scientific background, she came up with this encryption methodology, and then with professional physicist, she got that patented. And
She held a patent, but never upped it. She let it expire.
Yeah, she never took advantage of the patent for any financial gain. But it fell into the public domain, and Irwin Jacobs, the founder of Qualcomm, while he was a professor at UC San Diego, decided that that was the best technology for the future. And he thought about this actually in the 60s and early 70s. He hadn't started Qualcomm yet. But quite an extraordinary story if you go back and look it up. And she was an extraordinarily beautiful actress too.
I had Qualcomm in the back of my mind, but
So
you
with
guys,
that,
thank
we'll-
you for indulging us for this length of time. This
Yeah.
went a little bit longer than we had anticipated, but we appreciate your input a great deal, and you'll see the result of that a bit later. So thank you.
How about if we take a 15-minute break right now? Okay, it's approximately 6:20, and we are going to do our very best to wrap this up in about an hour and a half here. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Shaver.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the third in a series of financial workshops planned for this calendar year. And generally, these workshops are focusing on development-related charges, water rate structures, water rates, and the district budget. And tonight is budget night. So this is the second year of the two-year district budget, which defines the financial plan for the district. And the budget is designed to balance short and long-term financial goals, support improved customer service objectives, finance key infrastructure needs, advance water conservation, meet new legislative and regulatory mandates, accomplish fishery restoration projects, and protect and optimize the use of water supplies, including during emergencies such as seismic events. Since this is the second of a two-year budget that we reviewed with the board in detail last year, our goal is to really kind of provide information by exception, mostly, and then use the input that we received from the directors to further refine the budget for future board discussion if we need it, which we may not. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wunderlich, who will be our tour guide for this part of the meeting.
All right, thank you, Mr. Shaver. So I'm going to walk us through the first part of the presentation, and then when we sort of get to the charts and graphs, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Chen, our rates and budget manager. So that's our agenda. After we do the budget review, we'll have a CIP update, and then we'll finish off with discussing the reserve policy and looking at the financial planning model metrics I believe you're all familiar with. Quick district overview. During our recent strategic planning effort, we did affirm that the district mission statement is to provide a reliable supply of high-quality water at a reasonable price to our customers. Just a couple of things to quickly note on the next slide. Our connections are above 83,000 now, with the latest population projection at over 356,000. So the service area is continuing to grow.
And since these are general informational slides, we weren't planning on covering these, but we included them in the handout in case members of the public are here and are interested in learning more about this.
But the intent is to really zip through pretty quickly until about slide 20.
You can probably just go there.
Quick comment on slide 9.
Okay.
We have to maintain our AAA rating, which is S&P, but Moody's has a stress test that I would encourage us to take a look at and see if we also have the Moody's stress test on legacy costs. And Moody's is the only one that looks at stress legacy costs. 6% discount rate, payoff in 20 years. I'm not sure if we're there or not.
Well, if we can efficiently go through the budget review, and if the board can give staff more or less a blessing on the budget, that might provide us with more time to do additional work tasks that we'll take advantage of.
So slides about 10 through 22 review some of the accomplishments made by the district in the current fiscal year toward implementing our strategic plan. I have skipped all the way ahead to slide 22 now, which highlights just a few of the items related to the strategic plan that we plan on focusing on next fiscal year, and that's funded in the budget. And just to maybe highlight one quick thing in each area, we have the school lead testing program in Strategic Goal 1. Strategic Goal 2, we have construction of our fish ladder. Strategic Goal 3, something to highlight, is establishing benchmarking metrics. That's something that will be coming back through the Finance Committee to the board later this year. Beginning implementation of the employee engagement initiatives under Goal 4, workforce, and under Goal 5, communications, we are working on an upgrade to our website. So unless there are any questions about any of those specific initiatives we're going to be working on next fiscal year, we will move ahead to slide 25. And one of the subtle changes we made to this chart last year was actually drawing this arrow connecting rate setting back to the biannual budget, which is really kind of a paradigm shift for the district, that instead of sort of budgeting the cost and then setting rates to meet those costs, we set rates and budgeted to stay within those rates. So just wanted to point that out.
It's iterative.
Yeah.
It's what we call internally the circle of life.
Yeah. So now on slide 26, this is where I'm going to start spending a little more time. Some of our key budget projections. It looks like we're going to come in about $10 million less than budgeted for the current fiscal year. Much of that is in the capital improvement program. We are also proposing amendments to the budget for next fiscal year, so reductions of about $8 million less than what the board previously adopted. And as we get through some of the charts, we'll call out what some of those key sort of components are. So we're looking at an ending general fund reserve of just under $88 million at the end of the current fiscal year. And that is with keeping us on a 20-year payoff schedule
for our retiree health care and pension liabilities. We have received some data from our actuary on what those payoff schedules should look like, and that's actually where some of the budget savings comes from next year, that the OPEB contributions are actually much less than we had originally thought they would need to be on that 20-year schedule. So that's about a $2 million reduction.
It may be appropriate to do this later, but I would argue that we should maintain the higher dollar amount to not rely on the market, that we would not make a reduction into the $2 million in OPEB.
So it is based on the 6.5% discount rate, so it really depends on your comfort level with that discount rate.
Oh, my comfort level with the market's not good.
So moving on to the next slide, some of our key budget assumptions, and some of these have changed from what you saw before. We are assuming rate increases of 3% per year. It's in the financial planning model, the metrics that will be presented. According to a VOSCA meeting from February, there will be no increases to SFPC wholesale water rates until fiscal year 22-23. It's possible you can gather from Mr. Schaefer's reaction that we have some skepticism, but that is the latest data available from the agency. We have also revised our projections on the AMI project to assume that we will pay for it as we go in the financial planning model. We are evaluating financing options, so and we'll certainly be coming back with some of those as we move through the process of that project, but for purposes of the financial planning model, to be conservative, we've assumed that we pay as we go. But again, that doesn't mean that we've decided not, definitively decided not to pursue financing. Things are also moving along with the Los Vaqueros Reservoir Expansion Project, and we have made a one-time set-aside of $10 million just outside of this current budget time frame in the 1920 fiscal year.
On that point, I was in a conversation I had with the general manager of Contra Costa. They said that they would be prepared to discuss only fund our participation in the connecting pipeline separate from the expansion of Los Vaqueros Reservoir. And those would be dramatically different costs, and I would hopefully keep that on the table.
So our sort of last set of key budget assumptions, and this is probably the most important one that we sort of want to drive home this evening, and that is the build demand forecast. There's just so much uncertainty with what's actually going to happen with build demand. Are we sort of at our new normal level? Will build demand continue to increase? We really don't know what's going to happen. It looks like we will be coming in at about 34 MGD in this current fiscal year, where we budgeted 31.5. And so because of that, we have slightly increased our anticipated water demands for the next fiscal year, as well as on through fiscal year 2020-2021, where we anticipate that we'll be at our new normal demand level of 37.5 million MGD. This is basically a one-year acceleration on demand increases compared to what had been presented previously. But there's a lot of uncertainty here, and a big part of the reason why you're already seeing some of this, there's some more conservative assumptions from staff in the financial planning model, is the uncertainty related to water demand. California Water Fix, there are minimal costs in this budget, but it's funded through water rates. We assume 40-year bonds at 4%, and there's the gap funding that was discussed at last week's meeting is included in the budget.
When you say the water fix is funded through water rates, would we not get a charge that we could put on the property tax bill? Was one discussion. Has that been resolved?
So at present, at least Santa Clara and what they took forward to their board was based solely through water rates. So we're hoping to have some more discussion at a perhaps subsequent meeting and to talk into more detail about this, but we felt that the most conservative approach to take for now was through the water rates But to your point, Director Weed, this is not intended to be the ending point of a discussion related to that. So we do
in brackets with the property tax.
the dollar amounts in this upcoming fiscal year are very small, so it does not have a significant impact.
Okay. And that was an issue with Zone 7. You approved it based on the fact that the property tax, even though people said you can't trust that.
We also have a few staffing changes that are proposed for next fiscal year in the budget. We just wanted to highlight those. Deleting 3 positions, 1 office assistant in the operations department, as well as 2 treatment facilities operator positions in the operations department, but those 2 were previously unfunded. But we're a part of the 230 FTE count. And then what we're proposing then is to add 3 positions, 1 treatment operator in training position, an engineering tech. These would both be in the water production division, and then an additional position to work with Mr. Reed on emergency response and security issues and related planning. We're also proposing to add 2 defined term positions in development services, which would be funded by customer job revenue, so they would not be out of the district general fund because their time is billed to customer jobs.
And this is to address the current spike in development that is going on across the district. You heard the concerns from the Building Industry Association and their request, and their developers are essentially funding these positions.
Okay. So with that overview, I will turn it over to Mr. Chen to walk us through some of the charts and tables.
Good afternoon. I don't know how legible it is on the screen, but I'm going to be talking mainly about slide 29. All the subsequent slides are basically slide 29 with slightly different ways. So I'm going to focus on 29 and we can go into a little more detail as we go along. One of the first things that John has mentioned was the demand. The demand was 3 MGD higher than what we had originally conservatively budgeted, and that's reflected in this water revenue. About a $5 million improvement in water revenue for this fiscal year, from 98 to 103, and another $4 million in 18-19. The 18-19 is slightly offset because what we originally budgeted was a tentatively 5% rate increase, and as John mentioned, we conservatively brought that back down to 3%, so there was a slight mitigation there. I also want to mention about our property tax. As you noticed that we're projected to have about $10.5 million in this fiscal year, but $9.5 million next fiscal year. And that's because our state water project costs have come down, so the property tax we collect for that is also going down as part of a sort of a true-up. And that's reflected in the OMS, operations and maintenance line on the expense side. You see we have savings both 17-18 and 18-19, about $2 million due to state water project costs being less than what we originally budgeted for.
Herman, can I ask a real quick question?
Sure.
On this, when the bill comes due for the repair of Oroville Dam, are we going to see a spike in what we're having to contribute to state water project?
My understanding is Water Resources has budgeted projected Oroville costs into their source of supply line. So I think it's accounted for.
It's going to be sort of amortized in our long-term state water project related costs. Mm-hmm. So there shouldn't be a spike. And there's also in one of the proposed bond measures money allocated for the Oroville Dam repair if needed, if they don't receive the federal funding that they're hoping to receive. So it's kind of hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. But when you amortize, so they're getting a lot of money, I believe, from FEMA as well. So when you take what's left, you assign 1% of what's left to us, and then you amortize that over 30 years. It's actually not that significant of an amount on a year-to-year basis.
On property tax.
Thank you for that clarification.
The ad valorem tax, is that included in the property tax?
Yes, so that is the ad valorem plus the override combined.
And second, when there was a major breaks on the South Bay Aqueduct, is that, how long does it, do they charge us for those repairs included in that bill?
I believe they do, but PWR is a very slow process, so it may
So
take
there's a
fiscal
delay,
year
so
or
we
two.
can budget for
Catch
it.
up.
Okay.
A couple of more minor things on the revenue side I want to mention is interest revenue. You can see interest revenue has shown to go up about $1 million for each year. We have moved toward a 2% interest return versus a 1% which we had originally budgeted because of improving market conditions. The last thing two more things. On facility connection charges, you can see 17-18 we had a budget of $2.5 million and we're bringing in about $7.5. We have very strong development activity. But we do expect that to slow down a little bit, and that's why we left the budget for 18-19 flat. The last thing on the revenue side I want to mention is other revenue in 18-19. You can see we are showing a proposed budget of 6.7. That's to reflect all the grant revenue we've been awarded. What we've been awarded does not mean we're going to get it next fiscal year, so some of that grant award is like about $10 million or so. Some of it's going to be in subsequent fiscal years. $6 million is about what we expect to get next year. On the expense side, John mentioned we have California water gets expensive, but not in the near term. That's why we only have about $500,000 for next year. That includes the gap funding. It's about $490,000 or so, but spread over calendar year 2019. So only half of that's reflected in 18-19. I want to mention about our advanced
There are other water fixed costs. So there are other water fixed costs beyond just the gap funding, just to clarify.
Yes, but it's a slow ramp. The advanced funding, we had a budget of $2 million each year. And that was, just to remind everyone, that was done by a non-actuary. That was done by me, basically. So I was pretty off on, I was pretty good on pensions, but not good on OPEB, how it came down to be. And the reason for that is Bartell will be coming to us at the June board meeting, and they're going to present our OPEB valuation. One of the things about the valuation that they did was they're using a 6.75% discount rate from 7.25. So the 6.75 is very close to our 6.5. Plus, they already had a 22-year payoff schedule compared to our 20. So the advanced funding that we need is very minor compared to CalPERS at 7.375 in 30 years. And that's why there's such a small amount for the proposed advanced funding of $200K.
This is the one area in the budget that I felt that we needed to maintain the higher number. If you recall, when we established our last rates, in order to drop 5% from our rate structure, we went from 15 years to 20 years. We did that off the cuff at the meeting. 15-year, I think, was a better target. There are also some other internal measures and benchmarks. I think we should be pushing as hard as we can, at least to have enough money in OPEB to cover our current retirees, and we're not there. So I would encourage us to revisit that and bring it back up to the $2.2 million for the ongoing year and make that a 0% change in the budget from year to year. We need to put the money into the system. When Jen was working for Saramone District, they made an initial payment to try and pay it off, but they recognized the market and put money in order to get that paid off 100% as quickly as they could. And if we look at what the state of California, CalPERS did, they said that they would try to drop the discount rate when there were good market times, but they were not going to adjust by dropping their contributions. They were going to keep their contributions up and take advantage of the good position market. I think it's a mistake for us to drop it by $2 million because we had a good year in the market.
Let me buttress what Director Weed is saying here. You know, if you go to the bottom line, I'm trying to draw attention to the other board members here. We were projecting about an $8.5 million, let's call it negative, and we've turned that around to approximately $13 million positive. So you think about the impact here. To go from 8.5 negative, that's like over a $20 million reversal in our projections. And I think what the consensus between Director Weed and I at our finance meeting is we'd like to maintain that same level of advanced OPEB funding that we've been having more recently. And I think that would be a really smart move on our part. So I know how you budgeted it, but you know, as we go through all of the expenses for the next budget year, that's an area where I'm
Okay. And I agree. I think we'll get into that policy decision on payoff period and how that should be addressed. I think we should do that with all of the other policy kind of related issues that the board would like to do, and I would suggest we do that when we start looking at rates.
That will be my question. I think in principle that's a good idea, but I would like to consider what the rate impact. And we'll be prepared to discuss those issues in detail at that time. Okay.
And the other reason why I like waiting until then is because, as both Mr. Wunderlich and Mr. Chen said, we have a large degree of uncertainty about water revenue and what it's going to do. You know, we're starting off the summer cool this year. We have no idea, and that's by far the biggest impact to our overall budget. So another year of data will tell us, hopefully, whether we're still on this inclining sort of demand kind of curve, or whether the new normal is already here, because that will change things drastically.
And you can still get that advanced funding in by the end of fiscal year.
Potentially.
In 2019.
Potentially, yeah.
But it's better if you can make the payment at the beginning of the year, lump sums.
So, yeah, we'll proceed with the proposed budget you have, but just keep in mind that we're definitely interested in more advanced funding. That's the way to sum it up.
Yeah, and I think just to echo what Mr. Shaver was saying, is our intent with the budget was to reflect the established board policy of a 20-year payoff, and then not to say that we're opposed to alternatives, but we felt that the best time to discuss them is perhaps as part of the rates process when you can see the direct impact to rates.
But that's at least 6 months off, and what the impact would be in the 2018-19. I would hope that we could even address it earlier. We have $8 million in net operating income that historically had been running a big deficit, so we've got some money to play with. I would encourage us to consider maintaining the earlier policy, the one we made a change on just to try and keep our rates down on the fly. Our policy was a 15-year payoff.
I would rather wait until we have more certainty. I think there's nothing barring us to do a one-time lump sum payment if we need to catch up.
It's multiple payments in order to catch up with this huge deficit.
Right, but if we decided to fund it at the $200K value for starting from, July is our start of fiscal year? We could do a catch-up payment, right? There's nothing barring us from doing that if we decide to change the policy and we decide to go back and catch up. So I would say we have a current policy that's budget based on what the policy is. If we wish to change, we could, and we could always catch up. That's an option.
Well, I would encourage us when we do look at the policy, we look at having a minimum of $2 million contributions per year until it's paid off. The market fluctuates all over the place.
And if I could just add this is the advanced funding piece.
Right. So we still have to
we already have a baseline payment of about $3.5 to $4 million into OPEB, and a baseline payment to CalPERS, just the minimum CalPERS payment on our unfunded liability of about $5 to $6 million.
Yeah. Ain't cheap. But our deficits are 5 to 6 times our annual payroll in the present value.
So I think we have agreed to proceed.
I just wanted to add that at the end of the presentation, we have our financial metrics that the board has seen multiple times. That will show you sort of where our trouble year is and how much excess of our reserve targets we have, and maybe that will help inform the conversation a little bit. I think Director Sethy had jumped the gun for me. The last thing I wanted to mention was our ending performance, which is the net revenue and expenses. We went from a $8 million deficit to a $13 million surplus for this year. We're projecting a $7.5 million deficit to a $3.5 million surplus for next year.
It's improving, but you're a utility. To have fluctuations that are 20% of the total budget within 12 months is not, we've got some real challenges in getting ourselves more predictability.
So, one of the things I want to mention is that when we did the 2-year budget, we were near the end of the drought, but we didn't know how things were going to go. So we were extra conservative, and that's reflected in the budget. The proposed amendments for next year are sort of our easing up of our conservativeness in a way, upping the demand, reflecting some new information that we have. So I want to point out that we were extra conservative when we did the 2-year because we just weren't sure. We were a little gun-shy because of the drought.
Yeah, and almost all of it came from water sales with increased demand and from developer fees. So really where it is. How can you predict what the FIF is going to be?
And the other thing I want to point out with some of these numbers is, yes, it's a $20 million sort of improvement compared to budget for the current fiscal year, but a lot of that is development fee revenue, which is designated to certain projects, right? So that's not a benefit that we can just do anything with, right? Some of it is also capital projects that are maybe deferred, and you're going to see some increases over the next few years compared to what was previously assumed for capital. So it's not as if some of that $20 million isn't already spoken for.
Okay, I want to move to slide 30. Two things I want to mention is we have a target for each of our general fund reserves. You can see for 17-18, we're projecting for our operations and maintenance and capital reserve about $22 million of our target, $64.3 million compared to our target of $42.8. We expect to have about a $17 million above target for next fiscal year. That's a $57 million compared to $40 million. Debt service coverage near the third to bottom line, you can see we improved our debt service coverage to 5.31 for this fiscal year and 6.67 for next fiscal year. That's going to improve further in fiscal year 2020 when our 09 debt falls off the books.
I made a comment during the session that the term emergency, I think, is misleading in the sense that in the past we've felt that was when the governor declared an emergency, we had an emergency drought reserve. It's not an emergency reserve. We have full control of it. But we do have an emergency line of credit for also $10 million. So I think, I don't want to use rainy day because it's tacky, but I hope another name could become for that reserve.
And there'll be more discussion of the reserve policy later on in the presentation.
Moving to slide 31. This is the same data that I just talked about, but sliced differently. It's done by cost element. So you can see sort of the labor piece of it broken out separately. Labor is going up slightly, 3.6%. I want to mention two things about that. 18-19 does not have a COLA budgeted, but it does factor in the 3 new positions and the 2 defined term positions that John earlier spoke about. You can see purchase water has about $2 million in savings both years, and that's the state water project new true-up cost. Employee benefits is about flat. I talked about the advanced funding. You can see that water is a big decrease for next fiscal year. Moving on to slide 32.
So let me ask a quick question here. We were talking about this at the last finance meeting, but I want to make it clear for the board. So if you total up all of our labor costs, salaries, healthcare, pension benefits, OPEB, what percent of our total, what percent is that of our total revenue in the district?
Well, I think if we just look at this chart on our table on slide 31, if you add the total labor of about $8 million plus the benefits is about 17.3, you're up to about $48 million. If you want to include the OPEB and other advanced funding, that's about another $6.5 million, so you're at maybe $53 million total if you include that, out of a total budget of $135 million. So that's, what, maybe 40%? Something like that?
Right. So, the reason I want to make a point here is we get chewed out at board meetings when we go through rating hearings on what our labor costs are. We, of course, do pay, well. But this is not out of line if you take a look at any income statement from a Silicon Valley company. This is quite typical. And in fact, we may be toward the more of the average, lower end. But if you take a look at an income statement and just take cost of goods sold, SG&A, what's going on to technology development, you can be well over 50-60% of your labor cost is in labor. And you take a look at software companies, and it's even higher. So I think we need to make a clear point from the finance staff at future presentations. You might want to just try to put this in perspective. Say, what does this data really mean? Help us understand as a community, how do we compare this to the corporate world locally or to other water districts, other utilities? That would be my guidance.
The next two slides is the same data. One's in a bar chart form and one's in a table. I'm going to kind of focus on the table in particular. Again, it's the same things as I mentioned before. Water revenue has gone up because of higher demand, interest moving from 1% to 2%, facilities connection charges having high development activity, and then grants into the revenue. The next two slides are on operating expenses. As I mentioned, source of supply has gone down because of the water project. We have added a California Water Fix, which is the gap funding in a small, sort of a fiscal year spread cost based off of, as John said, 4% at 40-year scenario. OPEB advance funding is again lower than what we originally budgeted because of the discount rate that actual evaluation gave us. Operation and maintenance is, again, a slice of the same data. I'm really not going to go too much into this. I will jump toward A&G. So that's slide 39. A couple things I just want to mention here is we have budgeted election expenses for 18-19, so that's $450,000 for this coming November. You can see, really, our benefits are generally flat or slightly down. Our salaries are slightly up, mainly because of the new position. Again, there's no COLA budgeted for 18-19. And then you can see the health and safety emergency line. That 28% increase is primarily a new position for our emergency response staff.
And I just want to clarify on the election expense item, that's directly related to what the county charges us. It's the cost of democracy. It has no bearing on any particular candidate or anything like that.
Slide 40. I call this Bob's chart. This is a chart of our expenses, and the shaded being the labor. So you can kind of see which of our costs are labor heavy versus maybe labor light. You can see capital. It doesn't have as much labor. It is a lot on construction. But A&G, which is labor intensive, is the majority of A&G pie.
But sort of the purpose behind this chart is to show that there are no activities of the district that can occur without the staff that support those activities.
One of the questions that we've been dealing over the past few years is, hey, why, the idea that we're getting requests to separate labor costs out from every other aspect, and questions about why is their labor costs embedded in things like sources of supply. And what we're trying to show here is that you still need to manage a groundwater basin. It takes people to do that. You still need to manage your state water contract agreement. It takes people to do that. Those kinds of things.
I like this chart. We can rename it the Paul's chart.
Slide 41 is the labor broken out by different cost centers. It's pretty straightforward. I guess you can mention the expense projects, but that's such a small amount. It's not too big of a difference. General fund capital in particular, you can see it went up about $1 million. We are carrying projects forward, and that's kind of reflected there. For projects that weren't completed this fiscal year. And employee benefits, there's really not a lot to say on this one. I want to mention the PERS employer percent. This is our first year actually doing the advanced funding, and that's reflected in our 18-19 proposed budget. That's why it went down 6.4% because when Calvers came back, they gave us a side letter saying because of your advanced funding, the UAL that you need to submit for next fiscal year is less. So that's reflected in that line. You can see medical is projected to go up about 6%. That's just with the inflator that OPEB valuation gave us. OPEB valuation that we'll be receiving in the June board meeting, Martel actually gave us sort of over the next 40 plus years what they think medical increases are based on, or how much they're going to go up. And we took those assumptions and we baked it into our financial planning audit and the budget. Slide 43. You can notice that for 18-19 we're proposing 232 FTEs as opposed to 230 with an asterisk. The asterisk is for the two defined term positions that will be funded entirely out of customer job revenue. The next three are sort of our standard costs that we look at normally. For purchased water, you can see the big blue bar is our XFUC. You can see it stays the same. That reflects basically the minimum purchase, the 0% rate increase that John talked about earlier. So we're going to buy the minimum purchase. We cannot. The previous year we were able to get a waiver of the minimum purchase, but we weren't able to get. We don't have it for this year or next year. And then the green bar, you can see that it's gone down both years, and that's again the State Water Project savings. Chemicals are projected to go up slightly, about $200K for next year, and that's chemical cost that is going up. Power, though, is projected to stay within budget, and we're holding flat for power. Debt and service.
We track the water, power, and chemicals as a set class with a number as a percentage of our overall expenses.
I guess combined.
Yes.
Okay.
May I suggest that because that really is the definition by Kuhn and others of what a commodity costs are. We feel differently, but at least that's our cost.
Herman, when does the payment on the refunding bonds come off the books?
June 1st, for the 2009.
No, aren't we approaching when our payments end, terminate?
For the 2009 bonds, right?
Right.
Yes.
What year is that?
June 1st, 2020. So not this coming fiscal year, but the one right after.
Okay.
And so the 09 will fall off then, and then that's when our debt capacity will go up.
Okay, great.
And one other quick comment. We mentioned a 20-year payoff. I think it's more accurate to say a 2038 payoff because that's now 19 years. So we've set that as a fixed date. Historically, there were times when we just had it was a rolling 20 or 30 years.
Yes, so that's a good point, Director. We are looking at it as a fixed 20-year period to pay off our OPEB and pension liabilities. With fiscal year 17-18 being the first year, actually it's going to be fiscal year 36-37 is the last year. Okay. So by June 30th of 37, we would expect to be fully funded.
The farther we move that up, closer to the reality, we'll be in good shape.
Okay, so debt service, again, as I mentioned, the 09 bonds will go off our books on June 2020. Capital expenditures, Tony Lyons will be presenting the capital for that. And
I'm going to cover the information in separate set of slides. I'm going to present the capital program starting with the 25-year and moving down into the 10-year because that has more of an impact on rates, and then focus on year 2 of the budget and our current. What we have is, as you all know, 25-year plan, and the near-term 7 years, we have average expenditures plan of on the order of $40 million, and then in subsequent years out, we have on average $21 million a year. What we have in the final year is just we're accounting for the installation of a future water supply project. And that could take the form of various different things, indirect potable reuse, etc. But we want to make sure we have the funding accounted for our future water supply. It's a placeholder that we use to calculate our developer fees. So if we look at all the costs in the CIP, over half of the expenditures improve reliability, and that would be system, seismic, or production reliability, followed by water supply costs. The subsequent slice of the pie for water quality, I just wanted to make a note that that's not indicative of our concern for water quality, but merely that water quality projects are less expensive overall, at least as planned in this CIP. And I thought a different way to look at those expenditures would be how they relate to the strategic objectives. And again, it tracks similarly with over half addressing reliability and about a quarter for protecting our existing water supply or addressing future water supply. Roughly 60% of the CIP costs are funded by the general fund and therefore influence rates. Customer jobs, shown in red, are fully refunded to the district, and FIF costs are funded by developer fees. When we look at changes to the CIP, we, as Jonathan was mentioning, we look to stay within the limits of the financial planning model. So the rates are set and we stay within that, within that goal. We adjusted some projects. Again, this is mid-cycle, so we want to do a few adjustments, but we adjusted for available resources. One example, we had a project, Rock Pond, where we're looking at a diversion pipe improvement at Rock Pond, and we looked at competing projects and decided that would be one that could be pushed out a little further, and projects that were important to other departments here. Looking at one of our existing booster stations, Curtin Road, we left that one in place, and Ballesteros, improvements to Ballesteros channel were left in place. Similarly, solar projects were left in place.
Have all the directors ever been to the Curtin Road booster station? Any of you remember being there? It's the spiral staircase that goes down pretty deep. Okay, thank you. That might be a future fun field trip for certain directors in a committee meeting.
Especially when we get further into that project.
Right, and for
Yeah.
the orientation of our newest director, Steve.
You have to sign a release of liability though to go down. Sorry.
So here's where I'm going to start focusing in on the 10-year total. And so the 10-year total increased from $333 million to $356 million, and that's an increase of 7%. And the CCI increase within that is 3%. So just going down to the one by one on those 6 large programs, main renewal, that is the one program shown here that was shows a reduction in price, and that was largely due to a schedule change for the spine main project. So we had set, I suppose it was aggressive. We thought it was realistic, but it was an aggressive schedule and we were supposed to be in construction now. But we are still finalizing some of the technical details on that project, so it won't be ready for construction until next year. And that one project, if you saw Mr. Chen's slide, we were capital expenditures were $8.8 million less than anticipated this year. That one project accounted for the bulk of that, roughly $5 million. So what we have done is we are slightly altering our approach to the main replacement program, main renewal program, just based on the lessons that we learned with this spine main project. And that is, when we are focusing, putting all our eggs in one project basket, so to speak, and then if we were to not hit that project schedule, we don't want to miss our target for the main renewal program. So we will continue to do these large transmission main projects as determined by the priority or main renewal priority matrix. We're going to continue to do that, knowing that these are large projects in major thoroughfares and could be subject to CEQA delays or technical delays and so forth. So in conjunction with that, and simultaneously, we will be designing kind of a bunch of smaller projects that will have simpler CEQA needs, simpler technical needs, and putting a bunch of those on the shelf so that we will be able to kind of augment our construction of the large projects as needed. So if we had a bunch of these smaller ones on the shelf this year, we could put those in construction while we're still finishing the larger ones. So it's, we're still going to continue with these large mains, but we will augment it with doing smaller, simpler design.
Quick question. Would it make sense to investigate working with an engineering firm to supplement what we're doing?
Absolutely. So we have already discussed that in our group and with Mr. Stevenson. So we will continue to do the large mains that we have on our plate in-house. But we, what the board will be seeing will be a request for consulting services to get an engineering firm to do a bunch of those. We want to get a bunch of those smaller projects on our shelf and ready to go. So we plan to do that very soon.
Boy, am I glad to hear that.
Yeah, the premise is built into our rate structure was a plan to expend roughly $10 million a year at the time on main renewals and replacements, and staff intends to kind of keep that commitment. And just because one project, may fall behind schedule for various reasons, the idea is to keep the commitment that we made to the community.
The storage improvements, that was a slight change to separate out construction schedules of various reservoirs so that we didn't have simultaneous construction. So that was just a correction. Fish passage and dams, that's kind of the elephant in the room. And so I have some additional slides that were not included in your draft that you received Friday, where I'll talk about the increase to the fish project. AMI, right now we're showing no change to the cost at this time. We may have changes in subsequent years once we learn more, but we first have to learn more about what we're doing. Service lines and meter replacement, no appreciable change, and customer jobs is just adjusted for the work that we anticipate coming. So, sorry that there are multiple slides in your handout. I did that to kind of help walk through this explanation. But the fish passage and dam projects in the CIP, and Gina, perhaps, we have CIP, yeah, there are 4 line items in the CIP for fish passage. So we've got the RD3 fishway, and that is the fish ladder and fabric replacement, 2 separate lines from the CIP that's in construction now. We show an increased cost to cover construction support activities and services that are requirements to meet the permit and grant requirements. That is, cost for this project is offset by 3 grants that we recently received, or in part offset. The RD2 Lanier is the $1 million that we anticipate cost sharing with the county's project. The county has not completed their design, so at this point in time the $1 million is a placeholder, but that is what we expect it to be. But we still haven't seen their design yet. The Shin fish phase shows a cost increase largely due to the change in construction climate and cost since our prior cost estimate. So in 2013, GHD, our consultants on the fish project, provided a comprehensive project cost estimate, and then we set the design aside because we were having problems obtaining permits and completing CEQA, and then we were told there's a new requirement for this 408. Staff then worked with the permitting agencies, and we completed all of that, and are now fast-tracking design. And the design consultant is updating the design with what we learned from our permit requirements, and they just last week gave us an updated cost estimate, and they were able to use all the new information from the permit requirements as well as the data that they got from the RD3 bid. So, prior to last week, this was a very boring presentation. So, these are our updated costs. And so the bulk of the cost increases are in the RD1 flood control fishway combined project. And just to explain the cost increase, I broke that project into 3 line items. The RD1 control building, that is houses equipment and pumps and piping and so forth to operate our dam, our RD1 dam. So that is not a cost share item, that's ours. Back in 2013, we did not have the information yet from that. The design for the pumps and piping and so forth comes from the fabric vendor, Hydrotech, and Hydrotech is now completing that design and provided that information to GHD, who has now included that in the cost estimate. And so that, all of that work, which is $4.2 million, that increases the reliability of our RD1 dam, because all of the piping that fills the dam and drains the dam is original and will be replaced. There's concern about the condition of that piping, and so we don't want to bury really old piping under a new facility and then have it fail.
It's only 47 years old.
There we go. The lower fishway, the board was previously informed that we needed to redesign the lower half or the downstream half of the fish ladder design. Previously it was called a roughened channel, which is just kind of very natural kind of stone. And it was redesigned in the pool and weir, which is a lot of concrete and a lot more structured. And the reason for that design is that the regulatory agencies were concerned about the long-term operation of this facility. They wanted to make sure that it would operate not only today, but far into the future when the flood control channel morphs.
Why is that not the responsibility of the Alameda County Flood Control District?
That is a shared, I haven't shown the shared cost yet, but the whole structure is a shared cost.
And I would argue that that's a very fair deal for ACWD, because the fish ladder is way more complex than it would need to be just for the Bart Weir. When you're talking about a fish ladder that has to operate with the dam up or the dam down and everything in between, I think it's a very fair, I think we have a very fair arrangement with the county on that, frankly.
You know, it was Eric Cartwright's position that we would not build rubber dam number 1 today. He's left.
No, Eric, I'm sorry to disagree, but I was in those meetings with Eric and in the negotiations with NIMS, and we did hem and haw about the two possible different approaches, but ultimately, we both landed on the two dam, two ladder concept, and there's a host of reasons why.
Okay.
And credit to the department heads. They all met and conferred a couple of days ago, yesterday, and just reevaluated, given what we know now about these cost increases, would we, consider kind of changing course, right? And for a host of reasons that we'd be happy to go over, probably best at another time. The decision was made collectively that this is still the best approach. And Ms. Lyons is going to say, well, some of the pain gets removed because of the grant funding we were able to receive too. So changing direction has all sorts of implications. But even that, taking that off the table, we all decided, I'm looking at my staff, they're all nodding, that this is still the best approach.
And the fishway, when I say remainder, is the entire project went up $5 million, similarly to the shin screens increase due to new information about construction costs, new information about permit requirements, etc. And these are offsetting costs to the increase. They don't apply to the individual line items. The 2.5 is related to grant funding that we received, and the 5.2 is county's share of that increase, which is a little confusing. So I'll just say it was an increase of $17.7 million. But here's another way to look at it that might make more sense, and that is that the proposed CIP includes $55 million for all these projects. ACWD's share of that is $34 million. We put all of the costs in our CIP because we're the ones that are awarding the contract. So we want to make sure we have the money there to cover it, and then we will be reimbursed.
But our financial planning model does cover the reimbursements.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes.
So it is incorporated for the purpose of rates.
The takeaway in terms of reasons for the cost increases, the regulatory-driven changes to the lower fishway, operational and reliability improvements to the RD1 control building and facilities, and higher construction costs compared to the 2013 estimate. And we were able to use our latest bid information to make sure that is as up to date as possible. This is just a graphical representation of what I just went over. You can see the changes from the prior to the proposed CIP, millions of dollars. And the light blue is other costs. So that is made up of many smaller programs that make up the other categories. So just talking about, I'm just going to talk about the top two. Water supply changed of $4 million. That was because we removed Oracle costs from the CIP, included it elsewise in the financial planning model, and we increased the cost, the line item for Vallecito to capture the long-term option. We had the short-term cost for Vallecito's in there, but kind of for like the long-term cost, we put that in the CIP too. Not that we have a decision yet for what that will be, but we want to make sure we're planning financially correctly. And then I listed here all the year two projects with costs greater than $300,000. I think the board has heard of most of these projects, but I can answer.
I have
Sure.
3 quick questions. Where we have the work on Bay Division Pipeline 3 and 4.
Oh, yes. So that was done long ago. San Francisco has yet to bill us. We owe them this money, like $1.5 million that we owe them. We and Mr. Stevenson is working very hard to get that off the books this year, this fiscal year. So
it's amazing how hard it is to pay somebody.
I was surprised to see it here because I thought we had all the work
We
done.
are this close, and it is possible. In fact, we're really pushing hard for this, but this is our budgetary projection. But it is possible that we get that invoice this fiscal year and pay it, but the clock is ticking, and so that's why we're showing it this way. But yeah, there was actually a couple of years of full-on negotiation with them over the individual costs because their project went way over budget, and we had this agreement that defined how those extra costs would be reviewed and allocated and so forth. So it was pretty complicated, and we spent a couple of years in those negotiations, but we have landed at the agreed-upon total figure. It's within our budget amount, but now we just have to write the check. So we're that close, but that's why it shows up here.
Has this required the help of legal counsel?
No, we've arrived at the sort of technical agreement as to the cost distribution, so there's no more interpretation of the agreement that's required. We've dealt with that, and we've settled on the final costs, but now it's just a matter of making that payment.
Okay, let me drop to the bottom, the Patterson Reservoir remediation. Is that the dam portion?
Yes.
It's not the re-roofing that we're planning?
Correct.
Or
Correct.
any work associated with the roofing?
Right. So we are working with Department of Safety of Dams, as has been reported in our committee, and they are asking us to evaluate that reservoir and to evaluate the height at which we operate it. We really want to operate it at a particular height. It's better for our distribution system. If they want us to make some changes, we might have to have a capital project to address that. And so right now we are, DSOD is reviewing our information currently.
The last question I had was on the membranes for the desal facility. I noticed at the board meeting last Thursday in the water production report, this is for Steve, that the desal plant was going to be closed down both in September and December. That's what it looked like. So I was wondering, why are we closing down 2 months?
That's an old schedule that's actually would need to be updated, but we're targeting December for shutting the plant down to replace the membranes. There was a separate project to replace the decarbonator balls that are inside the decarbonator units, and that's why the earlier shutdown. It was 2 separate projects.
I see, okay. And the decarbonators are all outdoors?
Yes.
The emergency response strategic planning, albeit at a modest cost, what is that? Is that a new program? We're free up from the bottom.
Start with hazard mitigation.
Yeah, from the bottom, hazard mitigation and emergency response strategic planning. Yeah.
I don't recognize the dollars, so I'm seeing this for the first time. But to answer your question, well, I really don't know what.
Oh, okay, all right. So that is that's Jake Reed's project.
Okay.
And let's see, he is planning our emergency response as far as I know.
Okay.
That's that big scope of work that you had outlined with all of the planning and the staging and so forth.
That will be incorporated, as far as I know. The last I've heard any discussion about it with engineering, that will be tackled with the engineering report, incorporated all together in the engineering report. That has to do with the business continuity that you brought up earlier in the meeting. That's where this gets addressed, with the engineering report, incorporating the hazard mitigation necessary. As an example, the CIP doesn't reflect accommodating big emergencies other than what we've already done at the fall crossings. An example would be a Whitfield Zone 1 to Zone 3 booster to move San Francisco water if San Francisco shuts its isolation valves. So the engineering report needs to incorporate hazard response in its planning. We haven't done that in the past. So that's what that is, and that's why I didn't recognize it.
Okay, good. Pleased to see it there. I would note that the potential for putting in a box of projects that you really don't know what they're going to be, contingency operations and investment from a planning standpoint, so with set guidelines, how do you operate for a year without imported water. It would be beneficial, I believe, for our district. There's something called a planner's droop that we used to encounter, and I see it here too. 4 or 5 years out, the charts always drop. But you know they're going to be boosted up with projects that have not been identified.
Right.
So
another thing I would like to add, Jake is not an engineer. Jake, he's very talented. He's competent at putting together training programs, emergency response. But he's not a modeler. He doesn't know what facilities to operate after emergency. It really needs in-depth, multi-departmental planning, engineering involvement. It's not a gentleman with police and emergency response background.
not about the individual, but about the concept.
Exactly.
Amen.
Exactly.
Let's try to keep
To
rolling.
address this, that's one of the reasons why there's the additional emergency response staff person in the budget.
Yeah.
classification to be determined.
We submitted it.
Thank you, Tony, that was a nice presentation. So we're going to turn it back over to finance and try to get us out of here so we have some time to get home to watch the basketball game.
I didn't look at the halftime score if anybody wants to know.
We're down three. We're down three. 1955.
They don't really have a game.
All right. One of the things that came out of strategic planning was relooking at our reserve policies. And so we've done that. We've also focused in on a journal, the American Water Works Association article from a few years ago on water agency reserves that have helped guide this. But as sort of an introductory comment, developing a reserve policy has some art to it as well. It's not just a science. And so with that, just to recap, this is our current reserve policy with the minimum targets for each that combine up to a total $57.2 million. That's something also to keep in mind is these are total minimum targets to get to that amount. You don't want to set each individual one at maybe a maximum amount, because then when you add them all together, it becomes very significant. So we have some proposed revisions. One is to add a rate stabilization reserve. This was specifically identified in strategic planning. The staff recommendation at this point is to do 6 months of what we call our variable water sales, which at our new normal demand equates to about $9.1 million. We'll be talking about rate structures and other things at a future financial workshop. Depending on the types of decisions we make with rate structures, we may want to revisit how much of a rate stabilization reserve we need. Also proposing to split the O&M and capital reserve and to set the O&M reserve at 3 months of water revenues and the capital reserve at 1 year depreciation. And then this next item actually is just sort of putting existing practice into our reserve policy, and that is on the installers, create an installers reimbursement reserve for those installers reimbursement account payments, which we refer to as the facilities reimbursement charge, which we've talked about some in our development charges workshops. And then because of some of the changes we're going to be looking at and how we go about setting and reimbursing in that specific reserve, one of the things we're also proposing is to authorize borrowing from the Facilities Improvement Fund reserve, which would be repaid with interest. Because this installer reimbursement reserve is something that's usually going to be at, say, $1 to $2 million in that range, whereas I think we have like $50 million today in the FIF reserve.
We've done that in the past.
And that would bring our new benchmark up to $64 million. And so, unless there are any questions on these proposed changes, I'm going to turn it over to Herman to walk us through the metrics. And the red line you see in these metrics is at $64 million.
John, I just have one comment. I understood your reasoning very well in the Finance Committee when you were talking about the O&M reserve at 3 months. And the difference all along the way from 1 up to 6 months or so. You know, I thought about that after the meeting, and I still have reservations about being at 3 months. I feel more comfortable if we covered at least a third of the year, 4 months, something like that.
So adding another month would add about $9 million to our target, and we are viewing these as minimums. So that would mean increasing the benchmark to about $73 million. Maybe for the benefit of the rest of the board that was not in the Finance Committee, just to recap some of the discussion we had, they would recommend, so sort of the article we're working off recommends setting a reserve target for your O&M reserve from anywhere from about 2 to 6 months of revenues or expenditures. You could choose either approach, depending on what sort of suits your utility. And what would lead you to go toward the higher end is going to be based on a couple of factors. One is your billing frequency. So for example, we bill every other month. So at an absolute minimum, we should have a 2-month target to cover one billing cycle in this reserve. But the other factors that go into it is what's the consistency in your billing from month to month, what are your payment compliance rates, some of these other factors. And so in looking at that, our staff's suggestion or recommendation is that we have enough consistency in our revenues and high enough compliance with our payment by customers that we thought we didn't need to go too far above sort of that 2-month minimum. But this also sort of gets to where setting reserve targets is also an art and not just a science. It's about what you're comfortable with. And then also how this particular component of the reserve maybe fits within the broader overall reserve target.
I'm okay with 3 months, but if we felt that we had the extra cash or capability to set aside for 1 additional month, it would just make me feel more comfortable. But I'm okay with 3 months.
Okay.
But I'll be more comfortable with 4.
Okay, let me suggest even more strongly on this than I did on the emergency reserve. We change the name. We only establish rates every 2 years. Suggest that we'd only look at this reserve every 2 years. We need an operational reserve, not a rate stabilization reserve.
So part of our plan for strategic planning is to review all policies annually. So we would plan to review our reserve policies with the board each year as part of the budget process.
And my own problem is with the name that you put on the title.
Right. No, that's, we did think a little bit about that. We didn't really come up with anything different. It is the term used in the journal article we were working off of. Certainly, I understand, Director Weed, that you had some concerns with the name.
It's the standard term used throughout the industry.
Yeah, but it's the wrong term in the sense that you come up with rates every 2 years in our case.
John, you're going to have to convince an entire industry.
Can I just suggest we move on? Because that is the name of our reserve, right? We have a, well, we actually don't.
It's fundamentally bad.
We do already have an operations and maintenance reserve.
Thank you for allowing me my input.
Just make it, add another word to it.
Sorry, Herman, you're on.
All right.
So what we do at every budget and rate is I go over our financial planning metrics. So this should be familiar with our board. As John mentioned, the red line here for the bottom chart represents the new reserve policy. The upper red line represents the current reserve policy. The upper chart is the last metric the board saw. This was during our last 2-year budget. The bottom one is our proposed. So for this first one is our general fund ending balances. I want to kind of note our fiscal year 2022. That's sort of our most challenging year in terms of expenses. You can see we have just about $3 million above our new reserve target. So if we were to increase our advance funding, we would dip below our new reserve policy by 2022.
Of course, we have a number of other assumptions in there, such as the rates, the set aside for Los Vaqueros, and a host of others. Mm-hmm. Water demand being
the biggest one, yes. Yeah. Our next metric is our water debt coverage ratios. We are really well beyond. By covenant, it's 125%. By policy, it's 200. We're at like 500 now, projected to get up to about over 800. You can see there's a dip in fiscal year 2020. That's because we put in $10 million for Los Vaqueros. The most likely scenario is we wouldn't have such a big expense all in 1 year. It would probably be spread. So that's just on our end being conservative, because even putting $10 million in 2020, we're still well above our policy for debt service coverage. The next metric is our revenue versus expenses, whether our operating revenues will cover our operating expenses, including depreciation. As you can see, the last time we showed this to the board, we were targeting 2020 to get to that point. We are at that point now. Except for fiscal year 2020, and again, that's the $10 million for Los Vaqueros, where we dip slightly below, but we're on target to have operating revenue cover operating expenses, including depreciation, which is about $13.1 million. Our last metric is our rate revenue versus our revenue requirements. So whether just our rate, so basically our water rates, will that cover our operating expenses, including our debt service? We are targeting 2023, or we were projecting 2023 to reach that point. That's still the case for the new proposed budget. If there are no questions with any of the metrics, I'm going to hand it back to John to take us home.
So our sort of our staff recommendation is to really get into more detail with some of these assumptions and sort of fiscal plans, either as a part of the rates process or during the next 2-year budget. And that includes how we're going to finance AMI, our water fixed cost allocation, our Los Vaqueros set aside, as well as our payoff schedules for pension and OPEB. And so the staff recommendation is to maintain the budget assumptions as presented, primarily due to the uncertainty of the water demand, which is a topic we touched on at a few different points. And so with that, do you have to take any further questions?
So, if the board is comfortable, we would be prepared to bring the budget for board adoption at the June 14th board meeting, correct? And we do have a board workshop currently scheduled for June 5th. Part of that workshop was to follow up with board input if it was necessary to make some significant revisions and review back with the board, but I'm not hearing that this evening. We also plan to have Rocktellis here to begin the journey on rate design, but if the board is amenable to that, you worked hard at this workshop, and at the last board meeting, we're considering giving you that evening off, especially given that it is election day, and we don't want the Alameda County Water District to get in the way of people voting, because you never know, we might have large attendance at our board workshop. So if that's okay, we'll retool a little bit with Rocktellis and we'll reschedule what we were going to cover on June 5th.
Essentially what would happen is we currently have scheduled for July 26th another financial workshop, and it may make that workshop a little more involved. It does give us the chance, though, because by June 5th we wouldn't be prepared to put numbers in front of you of what different rate structures could mean, and our suspicion is that you may want to be able to see that before making decisions on different rate structures. If we wait until July 26th, then what we would be able to do is have not just sort of the theoretical discussion about the policy objectives and how that leads to the rate design, but to also put some numbers in front of you. And so it does make July 26th a little meatier, but we think it's still manageable.
You can't take this on.
I thought while we were looking at AMI, we were not going to proceed with tiered rates for single county residential customers.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Excuse me, guys.
I have a concern about hazard mitigation and emergency response strategic planning that's shown on here. It's come to my attention that there may be some reservations in the engineering department to take this on, to take the leadership role on this. So if that doesn't happen, this project isn't going to go forward. Operations doesn't have the staff to take the lead on this. Yes, we put in the paperwork to make this happen, but we don't have the staff or the resources to take the lead or the technical capabilities to take this on. So I just want to make it clear that if engineering doesn't have the capabilities to take this on. Could be a resource issue, then it needs to come off and defer to some future
Steve, I don't mean to
year.
interrupt you, but you need to take this offline with your general manager.
Yeah, we will discuss it internally, and we'll explain to the board when we come with the board budget, what we plan on doing.
And that could be under contract as well as in-house.
We'll obviously, we need to discuss it internally.
Let us know.
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm
It's
trying to be personal here. Let's close the
It's a
meeting.
serious matter.
Yeah.
You all take emergency response and hazard preparation seriously.
I understand.
Steve? We'll discuss.
We've got more coordination.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so
Anything else?
if
for
there's
us?
a consensus here, we won't have a June 5th meeting.
Yeah.
I raised a question here earlier. When we were talking about AMA, we were talking about delaying any discussion of tiered rates, particularly for single-family residences, and actually it popped up here, so I didn't know if that was
We need to have the discussion.
I'm not aware that there's been any
There's been no
board
decision.
on that item. I'm sure that will factor into the discussion we have in July, assuming the board is comfortable deferring that discussion until July. Yeah.
So, can we move on? Is there a general manager's report?
No, there is not.
All right.
Any director comments or reports? None? Okay, we'll close the meeting then at, what's that, 7:47.